Hello everyone, this is a call to actions, results-based radio. Today is Sunday, January 17th, 2016. Our subject is criminal acts by our government with the documents to prove it. Specifically, the Department of Energy, which we will refer to as DOE, D-O-E, accused of criminal cover-up, while the Department of Labor admits criminal conspiracy. Your hosts today are myself, Kimberly Schultz, and Bobby Vaughn Jr. Our guests are Jeff Walburn, Chick Lawson, Paul Brogdon, and Dr. David Menuda.
Yes, and if all of you gentlemen would like to introduce yourself as well and give us a brief background of yourself.
My name is Jeff Walburn. Currently live in Kentucky. Was a 31-year employee at the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, also known as Piketon. It got the name because that was the closest municipality at that time, so it picked up the name of Portsmouth. It's actually in Piketon, Ohio. It is a federal facility. People from multiple states work there. My background, I grew up in Sodaville, Ohio. Joined the military during the Vietnam War. I've attended Eastern University, Eastern Kentucky University. I've attended Shawnee State University. I'm currently a licensed practical nurse. I'm a family man, been married 37 years. I have one son, two grandchildren. I served my community in both states. I've lived in Ohio and Kentucky. I was councilman of the city of Portsmouth and vice mayor there for 2 years, but councilman 8 years. I also served on the committee for Kentucky's their growth and projection to growth in Greenup County. I served on that about 6 years on the Greenup County Planning Commission. Testified in front of the United States Senate, and I've also testified in front of the Health and Human Services Committee on exposure to nuclear concerning Piketon.
David Menuda here.
Okay,
right now, Dr. David Menuda, M-A-N-U-T-A. Right now I run an independent consulting company, Menuda Chemical Consulting Incorporated, or MC Squared. We specialize in scientific and engineering investigations. So one of the areas that we were certainly interested in would be the illnesses that workers at Portsmouth site have gotten as a result of chemical and radiation exposure. Prior to the plant shutdown in 2000, I was research staff member 2, or chief scientist at the site. So that's where I met Paul, Jeff, and Chick. And so in terms of technical knowledge of the operations of the sites, I'm one of the last of the Mohicans with that detailed type knowledge. Prior to that, I'd been college professor at 3 different universities. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not from Southern Ohio. Native of Brooklyn, New York. Undergraduate degree at SUNY Oneonta, PhD from SUNY Binghamton. I've been named a distinguished alumnus at both universities. And anyway, at this stage of the game, I like to keep my stir in the pot and know that every morning when I get up and I look in the mirror that I'm doing good. And I think working with these guys, getting to the bottom of what went on, and then let the chips fall where they may as far as the facts go. That's what makes each day a joy to get up and do something.
Yes, this is Chick Lawson. My first name is really Charles, but Chick is my legal alias. That was my stage name. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio. Went into the Air Force in 1973 during Vietnam, and ended up taking special training. I was a law enforcement K-9 specialist. Went through FBI SWAT school, Green Beret Jungle School, Marine Scout School. I was a single parent at the time, and I had orders to, just got back from combat unit assignment, had another one, and because I was a single parent, they said if I didn't get out of it, they were going to take my child, so I went to work down at the DOE facility there in Piketon. Because of my background with the Special Forces training, I was hired as part of the anti-terrorist unit or special response team. After being there, I ran for the safety office because I saw things happening that I knew shouldn't happen, and the safety office we had wouldn't react properly. And so I ran, was elected, and was there until I was forced off my job because of the investigation. They sent me to OSHA school to become a OSHA certified investigator. I've been through process school to learn how to understand the process system of the cascade there at the plant. And that's basically it with me.
Okay, this is Paul Brogdon. I worked at the plant for 21 years, took an early retirement. Before that, I was a police officer for 6 years, and before that, I was in the United States Air Force for 4 years. Plus, I've been a flight instructor for a few years. That's basically all I have to say about
You ran the
background.
airport.
Yeah, I was an airport manager for about 5 years also.
Okay.
That's about all to say about myself.
Well, but that's the Portsmouth Airport you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for that.
Thank you, guys. We're going to be using acronyms as we go along, so I want to kind of let people know what those stand for as we go. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And with that, we have already established the crime scene, which is the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant in Piketon. And we're going to go ahead and jump into Jeff's incident so we can start to build exactly, where this crime has happened and exactly what happened.
7/26/94 and 7/27/94. It was a multiple day event with multiple employees.
Okay, so do you want to just go ahead and tell us exactly what happened, and then we can just go from there?
Yes, it was July 26, 94. That day, reported to work, was on day shift. My assignment was the L cages in the 326. That is a position on the floor that was demarcated by chain link fence that held in the 326. You have to understand that even if they mopped up water, they had to keep it because of the fact that there was wipe contamination everywhere and that the system was going above atmosphere constantly. So there was product on the floor, and if you are in a position to make uranium for profit, then product on the floor is mopped up and then reclaimed and sold as part of any normal processed product. So working at the L cages, Gus Howe, Gary Howe, took me to the job that morning. I remember it well. I relieved Mike Reinhardt that day. It was a foggy day. We had that expression in our business is referred to as an inversion, where the barometric pressure pushes gases back to the earth. Unbeknownst to us, that day they were shooting a cell on 25/7 over top of us. There are, if you think of a car and maybe somebody being killed by being somewhere between broken exhaust between the actual combustion in the car and when it goes out the exhaust, think of this scenario like that. The cell was above us about 12 feet, and this cell that was above us was had a 40-foot boundary around it. They were pumping a mixture of 26 gases, some of which were hydrogen and sulfuric acid, hydrochloric and sulfuric acid. I can't tell you all of them, of course, because some of that is classified, but about 26 gases.
Yeah.
And what they would have in these vessels, the size of a pretty good sized room, these vessels would have product caked in them, and they would cease to flow through them. So they would pump this gas, isolate these cells, and reclaim the product and get it flowing again, or take it out of the system, take it to the 700, 705, dismantle it, and refit it, just like you might do a boat in the event that a boat was in the military. Now, this is something we know. They had problems with this cell in the past. They had problems with it afterwards. The company had agreed with our union that we were getting uptakes, and that they would tell us if they were working above us or anywhere near us, but they did not that day. Now, just like the exhaust on a car, there were lines that transmitted down to where we were, the cell being above us on another floor. But these lines, there's about quarter-inch lines, and there's probably, I would say, 10 to 15 lines that at some point, knowing what was going on in the process, you could pull a sample in a large glass ball that was taken to the labs that would tell what the assay of the material was, what kind of impurities were in it. But these plugs, we talked to Jack Winnicky, who was a operator. He said they're known to crack, vibration, thousands of motors, electric motors, much vibration, and that wet air introduced into the system would make cracks in these, and they would plug themselves. But you've got to know that they were forcing by pressure gas into this system, so it's coming down those tubes, and the likelihood that we could be exposed was and is likely, and has happened. If you look at the current HHE investigation that they're doing now, the plant has been shut down since 2000, and there are pockets of gas that workers are being exposed to now, and it's not even on stream. So to wrap this up, I was sitting at a position that we guarded. The guards were there 24/7. You did not leave this material because 97% assay has to be guarded at all costs, at all times, for all reasons that any normal thinking person would understand, that you do not leave 97% assay unattended with the way the world is now and has been. We were there on 9/11. But the point being, we're there 24/7, we cannot leave, and suddenly the atmosphere is changing. And if anyone's ever seen CO2 poured into a beaker, it will fill up just like water into a beaker, and you can see where the gases came up, and suddenly myself and Paul Walton, who was sitting next to me, were being like stung all over like bees. We were agitated. We couldn't get our bearings. And I said, we have to get out of here now. We have to get out now. So we ran to the entrance, and the last thing on my mind was to go see John Game. He was our union president. So I get in the car, and someone said something to me, and if anybody's seen any person that was ever hypoxic to oxygen, you get angry, or you lose function. And so I go to John Game, and I said, John, we're into something. They got us into something. So he sends me, he said, you got to go to the hospital. He said, get in the bathroom now and wash your face off. So I put water on my face, which I found out later was one of the worst things that I could have done. But at this point, we had called headquarters. We told them there was an emergency. So I go to the plant clinic, and not a hospital, but they have a doctor and they have nurses. They're treating me with isopropyl alcohol and ice. They're putting anti-HF cream on my face. They're calling my supervisors. My supervisors are telling me, Jeff, we're short. You've got to go back on the job today. You can't go home. You will go back on the job. And the doctor has a protocol that he's supposed to follow, but he's not following the protocol. We get no oxygen. We're left in the same clothes we were wearing for the whole day. And he signs the regular work and puts me back on the job. So as I go out back on the job, Calvin Parker, who had been my former SWAT team leader, picks me up, and he's safety now. And he said, Jeff, what the hell happened to your face? And I said, I'm burnt all over. I said, I'm burnt. He said, come to safety now with me. So he takes me to the safety department, leading me like a puppy dog through the safety department, screaming out, I have a man here burnt by HF. He's been burnt by HF in the 326. Now, we need someone now. So me assuming that I'm okay and that all is well, I said, well, what do we do now? He said, you go back. So I assume there was a man named Phil O'Neill. They didn't send him to do air samples. He didn't go for 6 hours later. They opened up all the doors. They opened up all the overhead doors, vents, turned off all the fans. So they put me back on the job, and then the company didn't check. They didn't check on me all day, and I sat there, and as I sat there, my lungs started granulating, and I spit out pieces of my lung all day, and I was in a fog all day and sit there. And by the time I got off work, I could not talk, and my breathing was becoming erratic, and I went to the hospital where my wife works in Portsmouth, and she said, everyone that saw me is going, my God, what happened to your face? And now I can't talk, so I'm saying, I've been burnt by HF. So she said, you get to the emergency room now. So we go to the emergency room. They call poison control. Poison control says, oh, man burnt by HF. My God, he's got to be in the hospital now. He should be on oxygen. He should be on prednisone. So they admit me to the hospital. And from that point, 11 days in the hospital, they quoted, I think the Center for Public Integrity said 2 months of rehab. I'm still in rehab every day with my lungs. You sniff 26 different, a cocktail of 26 chemicals up your nose that they won't even tell you what they are. Didn't even want to tell the investigators what they were. I'm in rehab every day with this, and it's a constant fight. But so they assign a local doctor. They assign a pulmonologist at the hospital. They're hiding me out. The news is trying to get to me. The companies and DOE's telling everybody, well, we don't even have a clue what he has been exposed to. Then day 2 happens. People are hurt the second day. They know I'm in the hospital. They know why. They do not hospitalize the people on day 2. Evan Brown is hit in the face with these chemicals, throws up in the floor. Paul Walton can't get his breath. He was hit the first day and the second day. They know there is a problem, and they do not hospitalize the workers. And so let's leave it at that point. I'm in the hospital, and it's coming to me that the company's calling me saying, Jeff, how are you today? Well, in Appalachia, I say fine. It doesn't mean that that's my condition. They would write in my records, he says he's fine. Then they would say, are you dedicated? We think you're dedicated. So finally, I slammed the phone down, and I got Chick Lawson on the phone because I knew if there was anyone that was going to get to the bottom of this, that would stay on this investigation, that he would. And I called Congressman Strickland, and it plays from there. And I'll let Chick take it, and I'll take a pause here. So if you want to ask some questions.
Yeah, who was overseeing the plant at that point?
DOE was oversight. There was a walk up to the privatization of nuclear. They called it the IPO, and it was they had formed a nonprofit or a privatized group called the United States Enrichment Corporation, and then Lockheed Martin Utility Services was running the plant dually, vying for seeing who was going to get the privatized nuclear facility, and they called it the HEU suspension program.
Okay, I think, Jeff, we're talking about two things.
Yeah.
One is the shutdown of the 326,
Right.
which was ultimately the HEU suspension. But I think in terms of the history, the Energy Act of 1992 created USEC.
Right.
Okay, and the Department of Energy owns the real estate, but at that time, Lockheed Martin Utility Services was the operating contractor for the Department of Energy.
Correct.
And the Department of Energy, in effect, wanted out from the day-to-day production activities, which is why USEC was created in the first place. And so anyway, ultimately USEC was created. Initially LMUS, Lockheed Martin Utility Services, was on board so that there was a transition from Lockheed Martin Utility Services working for DOE to Lockheed Martin Utility Services working for USEC. And ultimately USEC decided if they're a private standalone corporation, what do they need a contractor for? And a year or so later, LMUS was out. Okay, now that actually may be relatively interesting history. I mean, it doesn't change Jeff's exposure. And the other thing I wanted to point out was the facility's called the Gaseous Diffusion Plant. So in other words, all of the important chemicals needed to be maintained through control of temperature and pressure as gases. And when that didn't happen, especially the uranium, it would condense and it would leave deposits in various parts of the process piping. And so the operation that Jeff is talking about is what we would call, when we would shoot a cell, it's what we would call recovering product. So in other words, what you're trying to do is chemically react the uranium-bearing materials that have deposited out as solids and to recover them back as gases and then get them back into the flowing gas stream. Okay, does that make sense? And it is a classified cocktail. The problem is, and Jeff did mention this, any exposure to moisture is going to create HF. So HF is everywhere. And when people look at all of the hundreds and hundreds of chemicals that exist at Portsmouth, the most toxic one, the most insidious one, and Jeff is spot on with his description, the one that keeps on giving is hydrogen fluoride, or HF. And as soon as I realized what had happened to Jeff, I realized that he had had a bolus exposure to HF, and it wasn't handled right from the very beginning. And the result is what he's lived through now, almost 22 years. And somebody's got to take responsibility for that.
Right, and just to echo what Dr. Menuda said, any person in the 326 uptaking HF or abiding in an atmosphere of HF, your nasal nares, your bowel, your stomach, your sweat on your body is water. So the HF is reacting as you breathe it in, it goes through your bowel. I was burnt completely through.
22.
But anyone in the building is being, they may not be in the bolus, but they're in the atmosphere, so they're constantly being burnt. If it's Paul working at another site, if it's Charles working, even coming in to do the investigation, if he's in that atmosphere of HF, he is being burnt.
Yeah, and 22 years later, you're still dealing with the consequences, side effects of that. And they were trying to claim that only your dosimeter badge was the one that was altered, but actually there were many badges altered. Would you like to go into that?
I'd like Mr. Lawson to speak about that because he has firsthand knowledge of that. And as a matter of fact, and I'll just preface this, there were people who were unsettled about what was going on in the plant. They knew that Mr. Lawson was honest about his dealings, and they would come to him and confess to him things that really should have been being handled by the FBI.
Yeah.
Basically, after Jeff's first day, that was my day off, Jim Snodgrass, who was one of my supervisors at the time, I don't think he was chief then, I think he was operations officer at that period, he called me at my house and he says, Chick, he says, I've got some really bad news. And he said, Jeff Walburn is in the hospital. He's hurt really bad, and there's some question whether or not he's even going to make it. I said, okay, I'll be right in to start my investigation. He goes, oh, no, I can't let you come in today because I'd have to pay you overtime. And I said, well, I'll come in without pay, start my investigation. I said, we need to find out what happened. They refused to allow me to come. I mean, I was the OSHA certified investigator on plant site along with Herman Potter, who was the other OSHA certified investigator for, at that time, OCAW, oil chemical workers, atomic workers. And they refused to allow me to come in, so that he says, come in tomorrow. So what I did, the next morning, I showed up at work at 5 o'clock in the morning, got my uniform on, went over to the accident site. Now keep in mind, we have those process buildings are, there's 2 floors. There's 1.5 million square feet of space on each floor. We're talking a whole lot of football fields can fit in there.
Yeah.
And it's 80 feet tall, okay? We had thousands of what we call stages in the cascade in that building. You have outgassings, which is releases and things happening. So you see this product laying around. We know not to touch it. You don't disturb it. So when I go to the accident site, the first thing I see is the whole area has been completely wiped down, mopped, and cleaned. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere within that site. So that's my first red flag.
Yeah.
I go back out. I ask, I said, did someone take photographs of the accident scene? Well, no, we can't do that. That's classified. Now, keep in mind, they like to use the word classified. Some things are not classified. They use that word to cover up things, as we've went on in this investigation over the years. So basically, I go to the safety department, who Roger McDermott was the division manager over that. They're on the phone talking to people in Bethesda, Maryland about Jeff's accident. I walk into the office and they all shut up. And I said, what is going on? I said, have you contacted Jeff's doctor to tell him what he's been exposed to? Said, we can't tell him. That's classified. I said, the man may die if you don't. And they said, well, we're making, and they called it a white paper, which you have that. And they put some of the chemicals, but they didn't list all of them. And I won't mention the classified chemicals here.
Okay.
Okay, because I don't want to get us into a situation.
Understandable.
So what I did, I went over and I picked up the other phone. They said, what are you doing? I said, I'm calling the hospital. And I called, got Jeff's room, and a nurse answered. And I said, you need to go get his doctor, tell him he's been exposed to these different chemicals. And so they know how to treat him. They said, we will fire you for that. And I said, good luck with that. So then I hung up the phone, and that's when the investigation started. At that period, the supervision tried to steer me away from things that I wanted to look at. I was trying to formulate in my mind what had happened over a couple-week period, because we're into this. He's in the hospital for 11 days, and I'm trying to think, because the first thing I do is I go to the ACR, which stands for Area Control Room. And I said, may I see the log books? Well, we don't have them right now because they turned them over to the company to look at them. A guy by the name of Sam Marudis was over one of the safety teams, and a lady by the name of Lisa Parker was on that safety team that was investigating Jeff's accident. And I asked Sam Marudis, Mr. Marudis, I said, did you see anything unusual that first day? I said, did you check the log books? I said, yes, we did check the log books. And the log books, he said, we couldn't find anything. So they were shooting the cell on the north end of the building. Now, from where that was at and where that was taking place, you're probably looking over 1/8 of a mile away. So then he says, but you know, Chick, he says, we gave them an attaboy letter. I said, for what? He said, that was the cleanest log book we'd ever seen. Now, keep in mind, this building is over 1/2 mile long. Yeah. And there's potholes in it. People ride bicycles and golf carts. The bicycles, when they're going out and they take a log book, it's in a bicycle basket. Literally will bounce out. It falls into oil. It gets product on it. Mm-hmm. We actually handled the log books with rubber gloves so we wouldn't get contaminated from them. And he's telling me how clean this log book is. That sets up another red flag for me. Mm-hmm. And so then we get to the point, and they said, well, we can't find anything. And I said, something is wrong. I said, I want a formal investigation. I still can't find the log books. No one seems to know where they're at. So then Lockheed Martin says, well, we'll have Mr. Cornwell come in and do an investigation. Before he came in, they had decided that they were going to deny Jeff Walburn his workman's comp because of his injury. And I met with the plant manager, and we had 2 plant managers. Lockheed Martin had a plant manager. His name was Dale Allen. USEC had a plant manager. His name was Lee Fink. So then he says, well, we'll have Lockheed Martin come in from Bethesda, do an investigation. And so they request me to go with him. And I know this is going to sound like a terrible exaggeration. He couldn't have got through the area any faster unless he'd had roller skates on. Yeah. He didn't want to stop to look at anything. He didn't want to stop to check anything. He had already made his mind up what had happened. And what he didn't know is that myself and John Haberthy had met with Dale Allen, the plant manager for Lockheed Martin, had a meeting with him why they were wanting to find out why they were denying him his benefits. And he said, well, we know that you guys are liars and that you'll just say anything. And I said, excuse me. I said, we all got QN clearances here. It's the top clearance in the country. And you don't get that from being liars. He goes, well, he says, we've done another investigation. We found out that Jeff was down on the river partying with some people at the barges, and we've got witnesses, and there was chemicals on that barge, and that's what he got. And I said, no, that's not possible. And he goes, well, he was also mixing chemicals for his swimming pool. And we believe that he made mustard gas or phosgene, and that's what got him. And I said, really? I said, well, I've been to Mr. Walburn's house, and he said, I said, he doesn't have a swimming pool. And he looked at me, and he started calling me an SOB. and an MF. And I don't use that kind of language. And at that time, that's when he pulled his dosimeter badge off and pointed at it. And if you take your hands and make a 0 with your first finger and your thumb, and he says, I'm going to prove that he got 0 dose, and he points at the dosimeter badge. Our John Haberthy, who is our workman's comp rep, he started to say something, so I grabbed him by the knee and squeezed his leg for him to be quiet, because I realized he was getting IH and HP mixed up, the two of them. I was talking about ingestion. He's talking about ionizing radiation.
Okay, now in terms of the acronyms, IH is industrial hygiene, which are more the chemical aspects, and HP is health physics, which are more the radiation aspects. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm thinking, okay, he's saying he didn't get no radiation. Why would he even be going there? So that's when all the investigation went the other way. It started branching out. Cornwell did his investigation. I denied his investigation. DOE, I went to Gene Gillespie, who was the DOE site manager over all the facility. He brought in Randy DeVault, a DOE investigator. He and I went through it. He said he had read the logbook and said that they were shooting the cell on the north end. We go through that investigation. I said, this doesn't make sense. This cannot be what happened. So I filed a complaint with the CDC, with NIOSH in Cincinnati, Ohio, asked them to come in and help me. And that's when this whole thing changed. And then one of the ladies who worked in the dosimetry badge department gave me a piece of paper in my mailbox at the plant. And in there, it showed me that Jeff's badge had been changed from 0.027 millirem to 0. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not supposed to be able to happen. So now I'm thinking, okay, we've got a problem. So I start looking and finding that not only his badge was changed, but other badges were changed. The other people from day 2, their badges were changed. And it just went on and on from there.
Okay, now let me stop here for a minute. Because Lockheed Martin, as the contractor, was eligible for an award fee. And so the more of these unusual incidents taking place, the more complex the answers were, the bigger hit that they would take on the award fee. So in a bizarre way, it was in Lockheed Martin's best interest to get the numbers as low as possible so that it wouldn't trigger any red flags. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think that's important to realize, that unfortunately money is a significant driver on this. Okay, continue.
Okay, when NIOSH came in, after I knew Sam Marutis had told me about the logbook, myself with John Cardarelli, at that time he had a master's degree and an HP, and we had Dr. Stephen Ehrenholtz from the Cincinnati office, also from NIOSH, CDC, National Institute of Occupational Health. And as we were going in, the first thing I did, I said, well, let's examine the site. So we did that. Then we went to ACR 6, where the logbooks were supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And myself, John Cardarelli, Herman Potter, Stephen Ehrenholtz, there was a guy by the name of Jack Tolley, who was a supervisor, and Joe Deffenbaugh, who was a supervisor in ACR 6. I asked I said, can I see the logbooks? And they brought them forward, and sure enough, we went to that date. The logbooks were clean, pristine, which was unusual. We read them. It says they were shooting the cell on the north end. And we all read that. So I looked at him and I just thought, I got to play some liar's poker here. And I said, where's the real logbook? And Mr. Deffenbaugh looked at me. He goes, I'm so sorry. They made me do it. And the guy is almost in tears. And I mean this literally. He's saying, they made me do it. I didn't want to do it. And I said, where's the real logbook? He goes, it's an ACR 5. Well, Jack Tolley's looking at him like, what the heck's going on here? And he goes, Jack, go get it. And he goes, well, where's it at? He goes, it's in the metal desk in the back, bottom left drawer, ACR 5. So, needless to say, he walks in with the real logbook from the day of the incident. He's got rubber gloves on. He's not handling it like he did the fake one, which is, that's important because it was definitely contaminated. So the first thing I do as an investigator, I want to make a copy of this logbook. Well, Joe Deffenbaugh, by right, is allowed to say that, no, because there's classified things written here, and we have to have a declassifier declassify it first before you can copy it. I said, okay. So I write out a statement in my safety logbook that I kept, just like I did when I was a police officer. We keep a logbook. Everything I wrote, every person I interviewed, I would take notes on what I was asking and what they told me. So I wrote in my logbook ACR 6, recovered from Joe Deffenbaugh, Jack Tolley, was read by Dr. Stephen Aaron Holtz, John Cardarelli, Herman Potter, safety for OCAW, and Charles Lawson, me. And I said, will you please sign this? And they all said, oh, yeah, we can do that. So they all sign it. Now, what comes out after that, when we were reading it, the argon gamma graph was going off. And that's set up to catch gamma radiation. If it gets to a certain level, then it is supposed to trigger an alarm. But the alarm was not going off. Now, what was happening, not only did the argon gamma graph not go off, the seal alarms aren't going off in the building because they're leaking. 300, they should know that these things are happening.
What is the 300?
Yeah, that's the plant control facility.
Yeah, the plant control facility. They have backup alarms for everything that's going on, basically. And they control the electricity, everything coming into that plant to run all these thousands of electric motors. Matter of fact, the largest electric line in the world ran into that plant at one time to feed that facility. It was humongous. I don't remember what the KW was, but
Chick, this is Jeff Walburn, and I want to ask this question because I don't think in all this time the plant hospital with the doctors, should they have called the 300? Should the ACR have called the 300 and said, we've got an emergency here, argon gamma graphs going off in the ACR, other personnel there besides me, the real logbook showing that the system was going above atmosphere and that argon gamma graphs going off. Should everyone have been on board? Should there have been an emergency called that day for the other personnel in the building?
Yes, that is true. There should have been a evacuation of the building because they didn't know. They knew something was going wrong because the argon gamma graph's going off, but the alarm isn't sounding, not where we're at. Seal alarms should have been going off, but they weren't going off.
Okay, now, by the way, the seals are on the process cells.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a measure of the leakage of the radiation from the process gas. And so again, and in that part of 326, we're talking about very high assay. So we're talking about significant releases of uranium and also the radiation accompanying the uranium.
Correct.
I just wanted to make a quick note here. It mentioned in your affidavit, Chick, that it went 2 pounds above atmosphere. What does that mean exactly?
Well, the system was designed to be run under atmosphere to try to stop any outgassings. The seals that they would put in, I can't discuss how it's made because that is still classified. But the process to make these special seals would take a while. And this system at that time, I mean, this system started running in 1954, literally. And this is in 94, so, you know, you got quite a span there. Things are aging. They're having mechanical problems. Things aren't getting fixed as quickly as they should because they have to manufacture. Everything we had there, we literally could make. We had one of the world's probably best machine shops, better equipped than any place else in the world. They made special parts for special equipment within the building.
Yeah, so you're talking about the 700 and the 720.
Yeah.
But I think getting back to the young lady's question, normal atmospheric pressure is about 14.7 pounds. Okay, now the plant was designed in most places to run below atmosphere because what you want to think about, it's the same phenomenon, hot to cold. So in other words, heat will be transferred from something that's hot to something that's cold. So in effect, by the plant running below atmosphere, it would almost act as a vacuum.
Right.
Okay? And the reason why that's important is you'd rather have something external sucked in than to have something in the process system get sucked out.
Right.
Okay? Because that's where you run into problems with contamination where it shouldn't be. And so I think that's an important point. And so when you're going 2 pounds above atmosphere, you're actually up over 16 pounds.
Is that per square foot, per square inch?
Yeah, that's normally PSI, normally per square inch. Okay, very good point, Jeff. And the thing is, now, from my perspective, I immediately know that that's off normal. And so you've got issues with the people who are managing it to understand, first of all, that it's off normal, and then second, what do you do to mitigate that? And it seems, and the guys have alluded to what's going on today, because now you have situations where the plant has already been shut down. And you've got management there today that wasn't there when the facility was operating. And so they don't have any of this tribal knowledge about what went on and how to safely mitigate it. And meanwhile, you've got a man who's got an acute exposure, and you've got people being very complacent about significant amounts of radiation. And because why bother having these audible systems in place if you're not going to use them for what the intended purpose was? And that's something I think that has to be communicated. And then, now keep in mind also, in the 326 building, there were 3 control rooms. So ACR 5 was not right next door to ACR 6. So you had to first go out and get it and then come back. And each of these control rooms is like what you've seen in the movies with the control room, say, at a nuclear plant. And if you think about when we talked about PCF, Plant Control Facility, the 300, that basically was the nerve center for everything.
Correct.
And all of the decision-making needed to come out of there. And it defies logic why there wasn't more direct involvement of whomever was in, the shift super at that time in the 300, and then to give the direct orders to whether it's to the hospital, whether it's to the fire department, whether it's to the guards, any of the other groups, that here's the incident, here's the response that's needed.
And how long was this going on, this outgassing, this above 2 pounds above
Several
atmosphere.
days.
Yeah.
If you look at the actual log, we had a previous letter written as high as Bill Bennett of the DOE headquarters by outgoing plant manager Ralph Donnelly, including a letter from Mark Granis, who was a Purdue Boilermaker certified health physicist, suggesting that they should revisit the HEU program because they had evidence in the IH, which would be your P samples, your internal exposure, that there was elevations of these exposures, and the guards were not included in that, even though we were there in 24/7. And I want to make a point right now that there's a HETA report that there's been some manipulated figures have creeped into the truth, and a publication that are just not absolutely and simply not the truth. Mr. Ed Wagner magnified this exposure to neutrons based on 3 cylinders, and I believe it was about 3 hours a week for other workers. Guards were there round the clock. We were not walking off leaving 97% bomb grade material. And so to suggest that, one, that we were exposed to 3.5%, which has been suggested, which it was 97% and higher, and that we were only there for 3 hours would be a ludicrous lie. And Dr. Minuta sits here as example in fact today to say, do the math. Any reasonable, a high school chemistry student could probably, with a little help, could do the math. So Mr. Wagner is selling some wolf tickets to the HETA report. John Cardarelli, he was keen to want to get his PhD. He was following the program that NIOSH set out for him, with Stephen Aaron Holtz looking over his shoulder to bring him in, as they say, to the family or the program. But we challenged that 3.5% that's been set as fact. We challenged Mr. Wagner's figures and the amount of time that we were there. Recently, one of the guards asked for what was the work assignments and the amount of time we stayed on these assignments. Well, Rick Carell from the plant destroyed those documents. He said, well, you want to know that? We're destroying those documents today. And they did, and they wouldn't give them out. And so we're sitting there and we said, you can't take away the first-hand knowledge. We know James Eflin. We know Tom Swavel. We know Calvin Parker. They made the work assignments. They figured our time cards. Just put an affidavit to them. They'll tell you how much time we had spent in the 326. But the point being, getting back to this thing with the argon gamma graphs going off, the actual log that was discovered by 2 members of the CDC and not entered into their official record, a hidden log. I don't care if you're running a mom and pop grocery store. You run double books, you can go to jail.
It's simple as that.
But the CDC leaves out a hidden log that is produced in front of 2 Union Ocean certified investigators and doesn't put that in their log. They do, however, say that cells were shot above me, which heretofore in the other log, which would prove that they looked at a new log. But you look through that report, and we'll get to how we got the report, there's black marks all through it. It was going above atmosphere every day, constantly.
You asked about the 2 pounds. Keep in mind, by it going above atmosphere, it's pushing out the process gas, and it's coming down what we call an LCC cabinet. And that's where they would draw samples off of. So as those lines would crack over the years, it would form a plug, a wet plug, and seal itself. But since it went above atmosphere, the gas that's in the cascade or the cell above him is pushing that process gas down. It's eating the plugs out of the quarter-inch lines, and that's what dumped onto these people for 2 days. That's what burnt them up. NIOSH agreed to it, but would not put that in the final report.
I remember, Jeff, you also mentioning that while you were hospitalized, that your urine sample was removed.
Well, here's what happened. The first thing they did, there's a individual named Golnick that he sets the standard for taking a urine specimen. They did that wrong. I'll not get into the labor that, but they did that wrong. We didn't void the bladder. I had a bladder full, had been to work for 2 or 3 hours, drank coffee, so I have a diluted bladder. We didn't void the bladder prior to the Golnick standard wasn't met. We were not given oxygen. There's all kinds of criteria. But then, if they knew where any employee was in 24 hours, they knew where I was. I was right in the hospital, and they knew their system had been going above atmosphere and that I was burnt and had an uptake. And they didn't come to the hospital to get my 24-hour sample. And which seems to me that they were concerned about scurrying around doing all kinds of other cover-ups. But if they had a question about that, they'd have said, well, by golly, we got his 24-hour sample. We know he didn't get exposed to anything. So when I went to the hospital, I said, do a urine specimen. They said, we don't do that. I said, take my blood. Take my blood.
Do a heavy metal.
I said, we're thinking OSHA here, and it's a law that 3 people hurt in a chemical accident who are hospitalized is an automatic OSHA recordable. They did not hospitalize people they knew were getting exposed. They knew they had a person in the hospital in imminent danger of death, and they did not hospitalize people, and my blood sample was thrown away.
Well, certainly they did not like to monitor the neutron exposures, let alone well, the others, but neutrons being the most significant. I'll read a quote from William M. Murphy, the area director. Changes should only be done where there is some obvious and correctable error discovered. Reconstruction of data, such as would be necessary for neutron exposures, may be technically possible. However, the expense and accuracy of the data generated make the process infeasible. While it was determined that management was aware of neutrons as far back as 1988 and perhaps even beyond, company management indicated that since the exposures were less than 500 millirem a year, they did not monitor them. So they completely just gave up on monitoring all the neutron exposures.
Well, I can answer part of the reason why. And as the investigation continued on, when I asked Mike Smith, who was the supervisor over the dosimetry department, I said, what was Jeff's reading? So he tells me, and I said, well, he goes, but I think he had a bad badge, was the term that he used. I said, okay, when you have a bad badge, what do you do? And he goes, well, then we find 2 other people in your department, and they just happen to be unarmed guards. Now, keep in mind, the unarmed guards did not work in the high rad areas because they didn't carry weapons. Yeah. They couldn't defend it. So,
in other words, they would work at the entrance and exit portals rather than where what we call the crown jewels were located.
So what they would do, they would take a couple unarmed guards, do an average of their dose, which was probably correct, and then assign, that became the person's bad badge, that became your legal dose. And I said, well, what happened to the dose? He goes, well, here's what I do. He says, come to my office. So he takes me to his office. He pulls out a Rolodex file, and it has every guard in the police department on it. And it's broken down into 4 quarters. It's got, so he shows me my badge, my readouts, and there's several cards thick. So for each quarter, if I had a bad badge, here's my dose, and the card says I got 2.3 rem. Keep in mind it takes 1,000 millirem to equal 1 rem. You're not supposed to go over 5 rem in a year. My first quarter is 2.3 rem. My second quarter is 3.2 rem. So now I'm already over my 5 rem in a year limit.
Yeah.
And so I said, that's my dose. He goes, no, because we don't believe that can happen here. That has to be a bad badge. Here's what we assigned you. And I said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. You read the badge. This is what it printed out. Well, in the gaseous diffusion system, this isn't supposed to be able to happen. So we know it has to be a bad badge. So I stopped talking right there, go off, start making notes, and start looking for other evidence. And that's when I find that not only Jeff's badge, but average about between 134 to 136 guards every quarter, our badges were changed. So I'm finding that we've got a problem. So I call OSHA and then talk to a guy by the name of Bill Blackburn down there, who is working under Bill Murphy, not to be confused with Bill Murphy DOE. There's two different people. They're not related. Same name. He says, look, you guys just got privatization. I haven't been through process school. I don't understand the system. He says there's a guy by the name of Stephen Ehrenholtz and John Cardarelli. He says, we're going to send them in. So we're in there, we're investigating, we're finding things, and while this happens, just before they come in, they send me to Bicron school to learn how to run the card readers, the dosimeter readers. So I'm in the class, we're using actual read sheets from the machine that are projected up onto a screen. And there's probably 10 or 15 of us in there. Myself, Herman Potter, John Game, who is vice president, Clyde Doolin, Mike Smith, Linda Smith was in and out, and a couple others who I can't remember their names off the top of my head. But basically, the guy from Bicron, and this is the guy that wrote the computer program for this. So he says, here's a read sheet. So we're looking at it, says, you got the alpha, the beta, and the gamma sign. Joe Rotunda was his name. So, from Bicron. And I said, what's that symbol all the way over on the end? He goes, well, that's the neutron symbol that they want to use. I said, but that's not a neutron symbol. And it looked like a little cross with little circles written out at each point of it. I said, how is someone, I said, the neutron symbol is a funny shaped N. And I said, that is not it. He goes, well, that's what the company said they wanted to use. And I'm thinking, okay, big red flag again. And I said, well, is all these numbers at the bottom? I said, that's what the total read is. He goes, yes. He says, let's take our graphing calculators and we'll go through this. So we add everything up. Well, guess what? The neutron was not figured in. The computer was not figuring the neutron dose in. And when the man saw that, now this is the guy that wrote it, he goes, wait a minute, I didn't do this. It wasn't my fault. It was supposed to read it. And my vice president, John Game, is sitting there beside me, and he gets a real nasty smile on his face of contempt. And we look at Clyde Doolin. And I said, Mr. Doolin, why is this neutron not in there? He goes, because there isn't enough neutron to make a difference. I said, right there is 30% dose that was left out on that read. That's what it came up to. 30% of that dose was not being counted on that particular read. And I said, sir, isn't it true that you know that we had an incident in the 326? We had a welder that got 3.5 rem in less than a 3-hour period. We had a carpenter that was helping him because they had to take the covers off to get into the piping. He got 2.7 rem, and the guard got 1.8 rem. Now, I had already looked this up and found it. And he crossed his arms, and he looked at me, and I'm just glaring at him in the face. He goes, yes, that's true. And you could have dropped a pin and heard it. Everybody just got quiet. And I said, how did they get that? He goes, we don't know. And I said, I do. Slow cooker. So then I call NIOSH or call OSHA and file a complaint that we were receiving neutrons, they're not reporting it, and they're underestimating our doses. So now, in the Bicron school, they show us how to run the equipment. Now the procedure says when you read a badge, on the back of that badge is a barcode. That barcode is my employment number, specifically assigned to me. When they get the badge, we take them in each quarter. The guards would pick them up off the portals from the previous shift, bring them to the dosimetry lab. They line them all up, and they have a pin that holds them together. They break those apart. They take a scanner. This is the way the procedure says to do it. Scan the barcode. That locks that badge into the computer. Then you take the LCI chips from that badge, place them in the oven and read it, and that tells you what the read is for that badge number, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, what they were doing when the police department, and they had Herman Potter and myself to work as observers to try to get confidence back into the dosimetry department. They followed the procedure until they got to the material handlers and the police department. And I happened to be there when the police department was doing the badges were being ran for the police department. They would take it, break it open. I'm taking notes in my logbook. I'm not saying a word to nobody. And I'm watching the young lady, Lori Graham. She hands them the LCI chips. They put it in the reader, let it burn. It's a destructive read, goes up above 2,000 degrees. That releases the radiation, basically. It gets the read, and she goes, we've got a bad badge. So she, instead of reading that guard's number, they have 10 badges on the wall, and she shoots one of those barcodes, which locks that one into that barcode. When then it goes into what Mr. Clyde Doolin calls a bucket dose, which OSHA says is illegal because you've got a assigned dose that is not being assigned. It's being put in a bucket dose.
Administrative bucket.
Yes, an administrative bucket. So now my dose and the other guards' doses that were supposedly a bad badge, those weren't entered. They were, Mike Smith would then take our badge, the bad badge, and he would find the 2 unarmed guards and calculate an estimate, and that became your dose of record. Now, I go to OSHA, make all this aware. So what happens then, Herman Potter comes to me. He says, Chick, they're destroying all of our dosimetry records, the hard copy records. I said, okay. Where's it at? I said, how do you know this? He goes, I can't tell you. I promised I wouldn't divulge the person's name because I'm afraid they'll get fired. But he says, I didn't tell you. I didn't tell her I wouldn't write the name down and tell somebody. So he writes down the name Sandy Fout and shows it to me. And I turn around, and where the dosimetry apartment was above my office in the X1000 building, I go out of my office, and here comes the OCAW workers, and they've got dollies full of our records. I stop them.
Hard copies?
Hard copy records. Now, I'm telling OSHA that our records are falsified. So I stop them. So you cannot take these. They have to stay here.
Where were they taking them, Chief?
They were taking them over to the
warehouse.
To the
wood chipper.
Yeah, it was a BAT landfill.
Yeah, but what they were doing, they had a thing going on. They had wooden skids in the process buildings that were contaminated, that had absorbed UF6 radiation. So they were putting them through a wood chipper. They were taking our records and then putting them through the wood chipper. So I called DOE, get a hold of Mr. Gillespie, wouldn't answer his phone, so I got a hold of John Orson. John Orson, and said, I need you over here right away. They're destroying our records. He says, well, they can't do that. And I said, but they are. I said, I want you over here to help me stop this. He says, well, I can't get there. I don't have a vehicle. So I said, I'll come and get you. So I get one of my police vehicles, run over there, get him. And he says, well, I can't really go. I'm the only person here to answer the phone. And, you know, Mr. Gillespie's in a meeting. And I have to be here to answer these phones. I said, that's a bunch of BS. And basically, I barge into Mr. Gillespie's office, and I said, and he was talking to Washington DOE headquarters in Washington at the time. And I barge in, his secretary's trying to stop me, and I knock once and go right in, and I can hear, he's talking to Bill Bennett and these people up there about what's going on at the plant. And I said, hey, they're destroying our records right now. Well, he lays the phone down. He's mad because I came in his office unannounced. And I tell him I really don't care. I said, they're committing a criminal act. They're destroying our records. He says, what the F do you want me to do? I said, I want you to do your job. I want you to do your job. You're supposed to be the authority here, but you're turning into a perpetrator. They were not the regulator. They were a perpetrator. That's what was happening, and they were allowing it to happen. They did not stop them from putting all of our records. They took 40 years of not only dosimeter records, but chemical exposure records. Everything went through the wood chipper. Now, they like to refer to us as ignorant Appalachian hillbillies, and I understand that. Okay, whatever. But if I was wrong in saying we were meeting 5 rem, over 5 rem by the second quarter that we worked, it seems to me they would have wanted to keep those records to prove how ignorant I was. But yet, they took the records and put them through a wood chipper. Now, they later, which we gave you the documents, they were fined for destroying those records. They fined them $2,500. But they would only fine them from when privatization started in the first couple years there, from 93 to 95, when this incident took place. So that's what they fined him for. I asked Bill Murphy, who is the director of OSHA in Cincinnati after the hearing, when they fined him. I said, why only $2,500? He said, this was deliberate, it's serious, people can die. You could fine them up to $100,000 per document according to your classification. He goes, yes, that's true, but if we do that, we'll be in court for the next 50 years from all the lawsuits that's going to happen. Now he goes opening up a whole nother can of worms when he said that to me. So this thing just started compounding. So then he says, look, I'll have Bill help you. So Mr. Blackburn, he says, bring NIOSH in. They understand the nuclear side of it. They asked for the archive tapes. We're thinking, I said, hey, we got archive tapes, backup tapes. I never thought that they would do what they did to them. So NIOSH says, can we have the backup tapes? And it was like in January. It was bad that day. It was snowing. They're wanting to leave, to go back to Cincinnati because they have to drive down what's called State Route 32, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. In case they slide off the road, they're in trouble.
Appalachia.
Yeah, Appalachia. So they were waiting and waiting. Now, literally, the building that's got the archive tapes is less than 100 yards away from the office that we're in. And I said, guys, what's taking so long? He said, well, there's been a problem. And I said, what's the problem? He said, well, they brought the tapes up finally after about 4.5 hours and said, we were checking them to make sure these were the right ones. And we discovered that someone had taped over them at least 5 times. And John Cardarelli spoke up before I could stop him. He goes, well, that's okay. He said, after the incident with Nixon in the White House, we can lift up to 5. And I said, oh, really? And they take this cart with all the archive tapes back to the computer room building. And they spend another 5 hours. And they said, well, we were double checking these. And you know what? There's over 12 copies on each one of these. They took them to try to lift, but they were unable to. So now they've destroyed the archive tapes. They destroyed all the hard copies. Those are both criminal acts. According to OSHA law, you have to keep a radiation record for 30 years and 1 day. So if in 1950, January 1st, 30 years later, in 1980, January 2nd, you can take that one document and destroy it. They are supposed to be able to give you your lifetime radiation dose, which they cannot do, which gets back to the criminal side of this. The cover-up and the fraud is because at the time in '94 when Jeff got hurt, what we found out and what wasn't put into the CDC report, Mr. Cardarelli, when he wrote the CDC report, and it's the HEDA report 96-01998-2651, which I believe I gave you, in that report, there was 4 rewrites to that report. He called me up, and I had made a note in my logbook. And he says, Chick, they won't let me say the word criminal. I said, why, John? I said, it is criminal, because I know it is. But they won't allow me to say it. He goes, now here's what I have to do. Washington, DOE headquarters, or NIOSH headquarters, said the lawyers don't want to get tied up in lawsuits because we're supposed to be neutral on everything. He says, every time you read the word bad practice or not a good practice, that means criminal. Now, he's telling me this over the phone. He's upset because he's trying to do the right thing and they won't let him. Now, Stephen Ehrenholz, when you get to where the people are getting into REM dose, Mr. Ehrenholz had been brought in previously before that to do in, I think it was 93, we had a pipe break, and they had and the only way I know how to describe it, think of a hornet's nest, and there's a big green blob. I mean, this thing is huge. And everybody's looking like, what's that? So one of the guys takes a Draeger tube and literally takes his hands and sticks in there and caps it. That's when we were told that we had arsenic on plant site. They had never admitted it. And after that was being investigated, the Paducah plant, at one time, their piping was on 18-inch centers, not 24-inch centers. And there's a reason for that. 24-inch centers, in case you have a freeze-out, you will have what they call a slow cooker, but it won't go critical. You won't have a criticality, but you'll have a subcritical reaction. Slow cooker means subcritical reaction. That was a code word that DOE used all those years. We didn't realize. I wasn't trained at that time that a slow cooker was a subcritical reaction. The process building, like I said, this thing is over 30-some years old in the 80s. So now the piping, the elbows, they're getting deposits in them. It's backing up the system. It's turning to a solid. These slow cookers exist all over the building. The seals are failing. It's outgassing. And now we've got people coming down with beryllium. They find beryllium. We weren't told that beryllium was being used. So now we discover there's arsenic and beryllium, plus the other gases that are classified. The Tiger Team report in the 90s, we get a copy of it that an individual had kept. And in there, they say that the plant, they weren't certified to even run that place, that the contractors. And these were Navy nukes. These were admirals, former admirals in the Navy saying this. In that Tiger Team report, that's where they talk about in 1990, and where they said, okay, that they had found out they had wired around the seal alarms in the area control rooms. They wouldn't even let them in the X-326 building because that's where the high assay was. And if they'd have seen, if the Navy admirals had seen what was going on in there, they probably would have taken away from all the contractors. Now, Jeff gets hurt in 94. They're trying to go privatization. Now, if you're going to let stock on the IPO, is people going to buy stock if they find out that people are dying because they're getting chemical uptake and radiation, and it's causing cancers and death? I don't think so. Who would buy stock in something like that? That's what this all boils down to. The cover-up so they can go private. They're going to make money. They're going to buy the Russian warheads because they're trying to make the world safer, and we're going to blend down the warheads for them and sell it as material that can be used in nuclear reactors to reactor grade. Now, Charlie Cox, the NRC manager, because now privatization's in effect. Charlie Cox calls me in. The HEDA report comes out in 96. They got in there in 94. Not until 96, actually 97, that the report finally gets out because Washington makes them go through 4 rewrites before they'll approve it that it can be posted. So Charlie Cox, he gets a copy of it. He's reading it. He calls me in. Now, Charlie Cox is the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Oversight for USEC, who has jurisdiction over Lee Fink, who is the USEC plant manager. And remember, Dale Allen is the Lockheed Martin plant manager. So NRC has jurisdiction over the commercial grade material. DOE has jurisdiction over the weapons grade and above material. So now you've got 2 entities that have control, but no one really wants to take responsibility for what is happening with these 2 groups. Because what we were running into, I'd say, Charlie calls me in, Mr. Cox calls me in, he goes, and he says, Chick, what do you want? And I said, Charlie, I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean? He goes, what are you wanting? And I know this sounds silly, but he was sticking his chest out like, hey, talk into my tie type thing. And I asked him, I said, Charlie, are you wearing a wire? Well, I know I'd never wear a wire. Well, what makes you think that? So anyway, long story short, he goes, what do you want? I said, look, privatization's coming about. We got sick workers. People are being injured. People are dying. I said, give us a medical card that will cover all our expenses from all these things that we're being exposed to that you have covered up, that DOE has covered up for all these years. Well, we're not responsible until 93 because that was DOE. We can't accept nothing for that. So they start playing a jurisdiction game, DOE and NRC, playing the 2 off of us all the time. So I said, give us a medical card. cover our children that are born to us while we're working there. He goes, well, why would we do that? And I said, well, under the Atomic Energy Commission, after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they did a study that says that the neutron damage could be passed on to 4 generations. I said, that's your report, not mine. And he goes, well, yeah. I said, so every child that was born to me, as I had 3 kids born to me since I've worked here, I said, I want them covered. And he looks me dead in the eye and says, DOE's not going to go along with that, which led me to believe they were trying to find a way to get out of the situation. I said, let's have a medical card. They said, no, that's going to cost too much money. Now you fast forward, go into 2000, we have the Senate hearing. Jeff testifies, which ends up starting the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Program. Which, what did they do? They said, well, if you got sick there, we're going to give you a medical card, and we're going to pay for your illness. Well, the problem is that we have now, because the actual dose records have been destroyed. The Department of Labor is saying, we will not give you anything until you can prove to us that you were hurt here. Now, the first thing you would want to do, they had said, well, we'll make a site matrix for each plant. And we're going to have a good idea of what you were exposed to. Well, the problem is, it goes back to where Murphy and them are saying it's infeasible to figure out what our dose rates really are. Because they would have to recreate all those conditions and then try to study it, which would take a long time and be extremely expensive. Now, the Department of Labor, after they decided we're going to move the high assay off plant site. We're going to store it down south. We had a special building. It was called the X345. It was designed to hold this stuff in the floor. And the material was kept in a 5-inch casing, steel casing. It was approximately 36 inches high, weighed about 110 pounds. Okay? And that's about all I can say on that. But it was stored in the ground. This was tornado-proof, earthquake-proof. We guarded it with M60 machine guns. We had helicopter wires so someone couldn't land on the roof. And that's what we were there for, to protect this material. They take it out, and then Department of Labor asks DOE, says, what do these people work around here now? And they say 3.5% commercial grade. But if you look at the HETA report, and if you start looking at Dr. Stephen Ehrenholtz's arsenic investigation, he references that we worked around 97% assay.
All right. Well, going back just a little bit to the Lockheed Martin POEF report, when I was first reading this, it seemed quite strange that, first of all, the dates on them. One being completely altered, like with missing pages, entire sections, including a section involving Chris Kelly and Linda Smith. And is it true that the altered version was the one that was presented in legally?
I can answer that. This is Jeff Walburn. I testified in 1999. There was two hearings. There was, well, actually 3. There was one going on at Paducah. That's when DOE had told them they weren't dealing with plutonium, but they really were. So they were angry, and they knew they were sick, and there was they suspected a cover-up. Then there was a 1999 investigation with Dr. David Michaels that came to Portsmouth to talk to us. And if you want to talk about the subject of interlocking directorates, right now, Dr. Michaels was investigating for DOE then. Now he sits over the DOL, which I find that highly discernible and suspect that you would have the person who was the investigator that now sits over giving the benefits or determining if people would get benefits, and we've written him directly saying that we think this is a problem, should be looked at. But I testified March 22nd in the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs. Senator Fred Thompson was the chair of that committee. Senator Voinovich from Ohio, I was living in Ohio then, was the member there. We had previously met in '99 with Senator DeWine, Senator Voinovich, and Congressman Strickland, and we named this particular report that you're talking about, and when we talk about it, POEF 150-96-0088.
Yeah.
It's many times referred to in comparison or in unison with something about Jeff Walburn, but and I'll allude to this now and tell you, it's not about Jeff Walburn. It is about thousands of badges being changed in a corruptible and criminal system by a group trying to get into the privatization that had motive. There were billions of dollars being exchanged hands. DOE was becoming business partners with USEC and with Lockheed, and they were getting Russian uranium. They didn't get Dr. Menuda or guys like him to serve on this committee. They got an investment banker named Nick Timbers to head up the program. So why would you get an investment banker to head up a nuclear program if you're really worried about getting Russian warheads that had suddenly become a commodity for these satellite states that left the Russia? And the expression, why we're going to make swords to plowshares, it sounds very noble. And but so they get an investment banker to head this up. We had a fellow out there at the plant, quite expert, years in the field. He grew up with the plant. They didn't want him on there because he knew about nuclear, knew what we were running into. But now, Mark Granis, who had told them to suspend the HEU program, he'd been sending out records quarterly. And if you look in Section J of their contracts, which we hold their contracts, they're a public document. They were in court. We have those. They didn't get their bonuses if things were going on, if people were getting exposed, if people were getting injured, if there was problems. They were trying to run under the Davis-Bacon Act, trying to suggest that they weren't responsible for anything. It was always the government, they're responsible, but you had, so business partners. And so we call for this POEF 150-96-0088, which is an internal document. That significance of that is that anything had this number on it, so it was an identifier. And we had people coming to Mr. Lawson out of the dosimetry program saying, hey, they've ordered me to zero Jeff Walburn's his radiation records. Not once, but 4 times. They were going in and out of the system through back doors. They were signing me false doses. And he's going to file a lawsuit. And they say, Mr. Lawson, you got to know this. So, and I'll split here in a moment to allow. So I said, well, if I find one more thing they did, I'm getting me a lawyer. I got to get a lawyer because we knew now they had changed the work product document, hid the logs, and the CDC looked at them and didn't put it in the report. They changed my medical records, which is in my, where I gave my dialogue to Seymour, Voyer, and Pease, the external lawyers. They produced both copies, one altered, one regular, and one altered, high test and regular, I guess, or highly irregular. So then they changed my radiation records. But then we get this, my lawyer, at this point I get a lawyer. His name is Steve Edwards. and we're going into court, so I'm not communicating, and so we have, Charles Lawson and I have a dual path. He's investigating from the standpoint of the other workers. So they're giving me pieces of the puzzle, but they're hiding parts of it. And one document, I've seen about 4 to 5 different versions of the POEF 150-96-0088. But one unique thing in it, Charles Lawson was investigating. He was pushing hard. They waited 17 months from the incident to issue this document. They hid it, they covered it up, they altered it, they married copies together, they sent copies to the Senate, which were falsified through DOE as the facilitator. They let USEC investigate it. Pardon me, but by law, if they know of a criminal act, they are to go get the FBI, and the FBI will investigate. And the FBI has never investigated this to this date. But so we get the report, and we see November 22nd. Well, let's digress. September 6th, they asked to hire Boyer, Sater, Seymour, and Pease as external lawyers. It's in the report. September 7th and 8th, my badges are ordered to be changed. So I'm not suggesting they ordered it, but they were talking to these people, and it happened, and it's logged in the POEF. Then November 22nd, 1994, Linda Smith goes into a lawsuit and accuses 3 people, Gary Madukas, Clyde Doolin, and Mike Smith, of ordering her to change my law or my radiation dose because I was going to file a lawsuit. That is a criminal act, and they should have contacted the authorities then.
Lawsuit.
Well, the lawsuit was they weren't promoting Linda. She's described to by Rick Dively as the person, the go-to person that knows everything, that is honest, that knows this program inside and out. Mike Smith in the report is described as a person that knows nothing about the system. At one point, there's 700 investigations are laying under his, I believe that number 700, don't quote me on that, but there are multiple investigations of exposures laying under his desk. And they say, well, Mike, you got all these investigations. Didn't you do them? I'll clear them out. So he clears them out by magic. He knows nothing about the system. He knows nothing how to run it. Linda Smith is saying, I was ordered to change Jeff Walburn's radiation document. External and internal lawyers are identifying James Olson, who was their lawyer, and the report says, if you do this, it is a criminal act. So they knew. External lawyers knew. The report given to the Senate, after we named the report, was about 12 to 14 pages long. They took every interview out of it. They took every criminal thing. John Bodle, who was that made the program for it, said that the dose database, which was all workers, was virtually unmatchable. Unmatchable. Their lawyer says that there was a criminal act. They waited months. They lied to. There was 2 lab certifications: DOLAP, DOE-LAP, and NAVLAP, NV-LAP. They were running as hard as they could to get out from under DOLAP, to get to this privatization and get under NRC. They talk of lying to certifiers in the NAVLAP program, suggesting that people were trained that were not. It looks harmless on the surface, but one of the things they talked about, and if you look out at the Hanford, was overtime. They didn't know when a person was on the site or when they were not on the site. They had compromised passwords. Everybody was everyone else. Now, in a nuclear system, There were people, they're suggesting that Stephen Aaronholtz and this new team couldn't come into the 326. They used family members to go through dosimetry records there and certify dosimetry records that people had given their life and training to for years. So this report is a damning report, and the union's asking for it in 1996, and to this day, they have never, ever been officially given that report. Only after it went through a quitom and the court processes in 2004 did I first give it to Senator Voinovich, who was the highest elected official and person to ask for it. He has both copies. Catherine Waters Boland gave us the copy that Doe facilitated. Mr. Emery Smith was the person that gave that document. His name appears on page 41 of the full and unredacted, unaltered, unchanged, unmarried report. He was working for Lockheed. Now he's working for USEC. And the request came from Steve Lerner. Give us the report. It's been named. We want the report. And there is dialogue and a log from Steve Lerner to Emery Smith saying, we understand why you didn't put everything in there. There's some personal things in there. It wasn't personal. It was criminal. All the interviews were criminal. There was a systematic method of falsification. There was a dose data record, meaning all employees, that was virtually unmatchable, and they made up a document to look like only my badge had been changed. And we come to Gregory Friedman, IG of the DOE, who has sent multiple letters to the very elected officials, first starting out with Congressman Strickland. Angle writes, only one badge was changed and it was changed back. Then he writes to Bunning, only one badge was changed and it was changed back. Nothing wrong, nothing done wrong. Read the report against what the IG of DOE is saying. He says it to Congresswoman Jean Schmidt. He says it to Senator Rand Paul. He will not give the report to Senator Portman, who asks for it. So Senator Portman comes and the person asking says, how do I get this report? And I said, go to Senator Voinovich. I'll give it to him. So Senator Voinovich gave the full report that shows the criminality to Senator Portman, or correction, Congressman Portman.
Yep.
That's how long he's had it. He's had it that long. And first it was denied. I told him, I said, go to Doe and ask him. A woman named Jill Siegel, who was legal counsel for Doe, refused the report to Congressman Portman. And so the fellow that's asking says, it looks like not even a congressman can get this report. So I said, now ask Voinovich, because I've given Senator Voinovich the report. So Congressman Portman gets the report full from Senator Voinovich and gives it to Estill Stahl Jr. Congressman Portman is the first person to release that report to a civilian.
To the public.
And to the public. He knows that. He knows that now. He knew that then. He knows it before he became a cabinet member for Mr. Bush. He is a senator. He has not lost his mind. He's serving as a senator now. He knows it now. So that POEF report, and I want to stop here because it's been asked for in every publication. It's been named. It's never been laid with what was sent to the Senate. Ask Barry Bonds if lying to the United States Senate is a crime. I think he will tell you that it is. And this is much, much more than baseball. People have died. People have been misdiagnosed. The NIOSH is taking federal money, and they know it. Larry Elliott has admitted in print and on tape that there was a criminal conspiracy at Portsmouth to alter radiation dose. He is now over the 911 group, and I guess that they thought that he screwed us so well he could screw them a bit.
Yeah, what happened to that tape of him admitting that there was a criminal
We
conspiracy?
have the tape, and we also have it in official text.
We
Now,
don't have the tape.
we do have the tape. We have a disc of it.
Yeah.
Note, Stuart Hennefield was on that tape. Wanda Munn was on that tape, and the head of SCNA. And when Larry Elliott said there was a criminal conspiracy, not one of those people said, we better call the cops because there's a problem here with the way we're doing business. But moreover, they're taking money, public money, hand over fist, and no investigation has been forthcoming.
I wanted to add something here from Chick's affidavit about what Gary Maduka said to him about Lockheed Martin. I'll just read the quote real quick. This is pretty glaringly obvious that this is about money. Lockheed Martin is the largest independent contractor in the world. We have 50% of Congress and Senate in our pockets.
So pretty obvious there, right?
That was his statement to me, and I've written several affidavits because that very same day they called me and Herman Potter in for a meeting because of the dosimeter problem, and Gary Sayers, who was over the safety department, the secretary came and got Herman and says, you got to go talk to Mr. Sayers real quick. Takes him out. He says, no, we got to meet. He says, no, you got to go. So he and Gary Madukas, who was the division manager over dosimetry at that time, he says, go ahead, Herman, we'll wait. And he watches him walk out, but Herman didn't shut the door. He left the door open. What he didn't see is Herman had stopped outside of the door where he couldn't see him. He was talking to one of his union members. And that's when he jumped up and poked me in the chest with his finger and said, you have no effing idea who you're messing with. We made Karen Silkwood disappear. We're going to make you disappear. He says, when your wife goes to start your red van, he's describing my wife's vehicle to take my children to school, it's going to go boom. And he takes his fingers and flies them in my face. You can imagine I wasn't very happy.
Well, let her know what happened to Mr. Madukas.
Now, what Mr. Madukas didn't know, one of the new people that was in their department who had been a HP tech was a guy by the name of Tim Tolby, who has worked his way up through the system now. Mr. Tolby and I coached Pee Wee football together.
Who was Madukas's wife?
I didn't. Now, Jeannie Parker is my division manager. That is Gary Madukas's wife. She is one of Dale Allen, the Lockheed Martin plant manager. They do not have the same last name. Now,
What does she do?
she was over the police department.
Security?
Security. She was there when the report was being written. Now, Mr. Madukas, he goes to a Lockheed Martin Christmas party. Now, keep in mind, now he has tied Lockheed because of his statements. I had Herman Potter go down and explain to my president and vice president what had just said, and I didn't say a word. I let him tell it. And they said, my God, they're going to kill you. And I said, that's what they're saying. That's when they had already been harassing me. They had already been making threats to me. They were calling my house. They were telling me how they were going to burn my house down with my wife and children in it. How they were going to rape my wife and my daughter and sodomize my boys. We're getting these phone calls from people. I'm getting threatened by my supervision as I go through. Now keep in mind, I'm on a SWAT team, anti-terrorist unit. I carry an MP5A submachine gun and a 6-hour pistol. My supervisor is handing me a submachine gun, and I'm putting a full 30-round clip in it, and he's telling the guys behind me, you're going to lose your job because the chick, you're going to be picking up pop cans alongside the road. And they're telling this to everybody in the union that I'm trying to cost them their jobs. I'm trying to shut the plant down. Why are you letting him be safety man? They were doing that to get some of the
daily
union people upset with me. But during the whole time, until I got injured in '97, I was elected every year by a landslide to be union officer. The Gary Madugas, he went to a Christmas party, Lockheed Martin Christmas party. The way it was explained to me, he took 2 drinks. He told his wife, Jeannie, says, I feel sick to my stomach. Something's wrong here. He went to the bathroom and had a heart attack. Now, they're saying that because of his bowel movement that caused, hit a nerve, blah, blah, he had a heart attack. I don't believe that. I believe that he tied Lockheed Martin to the death of Karen Silkwood, and they had to get him shut up permanently.
Poisoned.
I believe so. Can't prove that, but in my opinion, I say it's possibly true.
Yeah. Wow, yeah. The coroner was probably involved in that cover-up too, but that's beside the point.
Now this this POEF document that we're talking about that has, you know, basically the smoking gun in it. Now you guys took that on your own time in 2012. You took that to D.C., correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Paid for the car, and we had to bump some money. And people here in Appalachia don't have a lot of money. We like to make a joke about that, but we had to bum money. I had some credits from work for a hotel. But yeah, we went up and we made the rounds to the senators and congressmen that should know with documents, and to the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs.
Yeah, so now the Department of Labor has stated that they're turning this matter over to their Inspector General Division of Labor Racketeering and Fraud Investigations, because obviously there is criminal fraud and racketeering between multi-agencies. To me, this is not from a legal perspective because I don't have a legal background, but this seems to me to be an act of genocidal treason, turning your back on individuals who are working for you, quote, valued workers, and using them, it kind of seems like as human experiments, but I just wanted to touch on that. Really does equate to racketeering, fraud, and, shall I say, mass murder.
Yes, we believe that.
We believe that. It's widely known, if you're taking money under false pretense, that you have Larry Elliott. He stated on the record, we have the documents he signed for. He stated in front of the Guard Union President, David Bowe, when he and Dr. James Neaton came to the union office and signed for the documents. There's a copy that shows that they signed for these documents. They said, this is a criminal conspiracy. This is a criminal conspiracy to alter radiation dose at Portsmouth. And we're going, call the authorities, call the police. Well, it's not our purview to do this. I said, I didn't say it was your purview to do it. Your responsibility taking public monies is to call for investigation. And the FBI, as far as I know, still does criminal investigations. Why isn't Stuart Hennefield, Wanda Munn, Larry Elliott, Dr. James Neaton, Dr. Stephen Aaronholtz, John Cardarelli from the CDC, Dr. Paul J. Zimmer, who I spoke to with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama at the Health and Human Services, we gave them 50 hard documents that shows criminality. Dr. Zimmer sitting sideways, biting his thumbnail, while his other members of his committee who had touted their presidential appointment, sitting with their hands flat and wrapped and their eyes bugged out as I spoke and named and slapped a report. Zimmer says, well, we'll put this all on the internet. We're gonna put every one of these documents on the internet. Well, later, Larry Elliott says, well, Dr. Zimmer must have misspoke or something, because we can't put that stuff out just because you want to. And I said, well, Larry, you take every name and title out of the 41-page report. And I said, it still says it was criminal. And I said, you're the one that said it, not me. And he said, we said that. We said that.
Now, is Zimmer the head of the federally tasked advisory?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
The radiation radiation exposure.
Health and Human Services, OCAS, Office of Compensation and Analysis, presidentially appointed. We've got the list of documents that was given, Dr. Lewis Wade, I believe. But here's the other thing, and this is a unique thing. If Herman Potter squeals, oh my God, Herman Potter has spoken. Herman Potter has spoken. He's the union president of the USW. We have documentation of David Bowe writing Randy DeVault of DOE saying there was a criminal act on our plant. We have David Bowe saying there was a criminal act to Congresswoman Schmidt. We have former union president John Game saying, you must look at the POEF report. How could you do a dose recreation without looking at it? And we have the document where OSHA has said to us, and we would show the document to anyone interested, we'll reopen this investigation if need be. We will reopen this investigation. I believe, just in the conversation you've heard here in this short time, there is a need be. And why aren't our elected officials saying, my God, let's get the GAO or FBI or somebody on this? It appears that DOE and the Department of Labor have run amok.
And it gets even worse now with the Department of Labor then sitting in judgment on both the radiation and the chemical claims, where they put the responsibility on the claimant to find these records, because you've got to be able to support your contention that the illness that you have today resulted from some type of occupational exposure that you had while you were at a DOE site. And so you can talk from now until tomorrow that I did this and that, and my doctor says that it's evident to he or she that that exposure triggered your condition. But lo and behold, when you go and look for the records, the cupboard is bare. And because that responsibility is placed on the worker, on the claimant, almost none of the Department of Labor claims ever get accepted.
One point I want to make, this new health hazard evaluation, there was a $230,000 fine in the middle of the health hazard evaluation for falsification of radiation documents, almost a mirror to our previous investigation. And here sits Dr. Ehrenholtz again on this investigation, who committed what some people might suggest is a crime of omission. Yes. Either he did it or he was ordered to do it. And he's on the new investigation, so would you trust that investigation? They wouldn't let him in the 326. They walked off. They don't even want to identify the arsenic, which was in the very reports that they wrote.
The original reports.
But you've got Paul Brogdon here. Here's an example. We already know, and it's widely known, that arsenic doesn't only cause bladder cancer, it causes prostate cancer, as do the neutron. And so Paul Brogdon goes to them with his supplication, goes to NIOSH and says, I have 36.5% exposure. You have said in print that the additional exposure, talked to about the Bicron School by Charles Lawson, adds additional, they went 15 to 30%. We said, okay, well, let's go with 15%. Do the math. Paul Brogdon gets his benefits by more likely than not, and we take all of our documents that we're talking about here and submit them to NIOSH. We submitted them through the Health and Human Service. Larry Elliott signs for them. Paul Brogdon takes them. They have the documents, but what they do, because we reared our head, and the Japanese say, hit the nail that sticks up the highest, the hardest. So they start whipping Paul Brogdon down to, now he's down to 5%. And we're going, how did he have 36.5% causation plus your low ball figure of 15%
added to it?
Added to it, and he can't get his benefits, and they've given it to guys that worked on the roof at the 326. There's no consistency. If you just want to talk about the consistency of the matrix, it's a joke. But they've given it to a contract worker that worked on the roof because they said, well, we had releases. They went out on the roof, and we said, guess what? Don't want to tell you, but we had a few on the inside too. Not only that, Paul set these cylinders. He's set by 10 and 15 cylinders, and Dr. Minuta can tell you, if you do the math and do the exponential elevation of neutron exposure based on multiple cylinders and the bristling effect and all the things that come into play, and Paul Brogdon sits with his back within inches of those cylinders, and between let me finish up. In the HETA, between pages 5 and 9, they themselves say that the proximity to the assay increases your chances of having problems. The slow cooker effect, 97% assay, Paul Brogdon's back right there. And you will say that I'm a liar, but I'm not. In the middle of our transfer of this high assay material, if the OCAW, if it was their time to go to lunch, they'd let those workers go to lunch and leave us sitting in a compromised position outside of our protected areas with submachine guns waiting while Herman Potter and his group ate their soup. You think I'm lying? Check it.
This is actually true. Chick, go ahead, please.
I want to interject on that 3 hour. How I got that, Ed Wagner, when I said I'm questioning because I'd found out, I'd heard. I said, do you have any documents that says why we shouldn't be exposed, or if we're exposed to neutron? He goes, well, we did a study, and he said, I really don't think you'll understand it, but he says, I'll give you a copy of it. So he gives me his report, and Mr. Bassett helped do that. And on there, they're saying that the material handlers only work 3 hours a week. And based on 3 hours a week, working 50 weeks of the year, 2 weeks off for vacation, is the way they figured it, that they only got 0.75 millirem on the neutrons. Now, SCNA came in to do an evaluation. There was a lady by the name of Kathleen Demers. Her job was to figure radiation doses. I give her that exact same copy that Ed Wagner gave me. I said, now, they work 3 hours a week in that vault. I was in that vault for sometimes 40 hours a week. Sometimes we had to work a lot of 12-hour shifts. And give you an example, we worked one time 12 hours for a year and a half. So, and then because we were still short-manned, every other day they could force us. We had forced overtime because we fell under the National Security Act. Every other day we would have to work a 16-hour shift. So I said, could you please figure what my neutron dose, based off of Ed Wagner's document and Mr. Bassett's document, what it would be? And so she sat with me and Davey Atkins, who was the safety officer that got voted in after I was forced off the plant site after I got injured and wasn't allowed to go back to work because they said I was too honest in my Christian beliefs and they knew they couldn't buy me. And that's an exact quote. She figured it up and says, based on Mr. Wagner's rates here and how they're figuring it, we should have been on neutron badges, neutron monitors from the very get-go, at least until the late 70s up through the 80s, which all that time they said neutrons didn't even exist. So she said we were way over the max limit. That's what sort of helped when the NIOSH said, okay, we need to give another 15 to 30%. That's what helped bring that about. Now, Miss Demers, when she figured that out for us, SCNA found out that she did that. They pulled her clearance, her Q clearance. And she had to get a lawyer to get her clearance back so she could go back to work.
What did Abe Zeton say about our documents?
When Mr. Zeton was there, they had sent different teams, all the different DOE sites, some NRC sites. I walked in, showed him these documents. He's reading it, and he goes, "My God, this is the smoking gun of the industry." That's his exact words. He was the vice president of SCNA. He gets on the phone from our union office, starts calling all the teams in from the other sites, says, "Come to Portsmouth. We've got to get into their vaults and find all these different documents." So now we got people coming in. They do their investigation. The smoking gun of the industry became less than 4 lines in a report. Changed one badge and changed it back. So I contacted Mr. Zeton. I said, "Abe," I said, "you said it was smoking gun industry. Why did you only give us 4 lines?" I said, "You know they changed more than one badge. And we showed you some depositions and things where they admit to changing thousands of badges." He goes, "Well, DOE was paying for the report. If we had said that, we wouldn't get no more jobs from them." That's an exact quote.
So in other words, the contractor's the driver.
Yes.
Now, I want to also embellish what has been discussed here, because the issue on neutrons, as I've investigated this independently, has been completely misrepresented from the very beginning. And I want to just kind of walk you through why that's so. You're aware that all of us grew up in the gaseous diffusion business. In other words, today, uranium is generally enriched via centrifuge. And that's part of the controversy with Iran and with North Korea and Pakistan and so on. Well, we did it the old-fashioned way, the industrial way developed during the war with the Manhattan Project. And fundamentally, when you're doing your feed, the feed material, if it's more or less natural assay, would be less than 0.75%, the money isotope, which is uranium-235. So more than 99% of what you're feeding is the uranium-238 isotope. So when we're talking about highly enriched material, we're talking about the industrial process that's necessary to convert the uranium-235 level all the way up to 95 to 97%. One of the significant problems is that leadership in DOE from the very beginning was not interested in what the mass balance is. In other words, what's that remaining 3 to 5%? Okay, and I can tell you, as an industrial scientist and engineer, I can get in a whole world of trouble if I can't tell you what 100% of the ingredients are. Okay, and when I bring that up to people, it's a revelation, because ultimately what our uranium enrichment process did, and I think this is going to be the key that eventually will unlock Paul's claim, is that as you're building up the uranium-235 isotope, you're also building up all of the other lighter isotopes. And when I had a hearing with the Department of Labor recently, the hearing representative is hearing this for the first time. And my position on that is that individual shouldn't be working for the Department of Labor, because what I'm talking about is not what I'll refer to as a Minuta invention, but something that was learned during the Manhattan Project. And so to encapsulate here, the isotope that's most troublesome is the uranium-234 isotope. And so by the time you get to the part of the plant where Jeff's incident took place, and you've got 95 to 97% uranium-235, you now also have 1 to 2% uranium-234. But we're not talking about insignificant amounts, because you may have in any of these samples, any of these cylinders, several kilograms of uranium-234. And so where this became an issue, we had a man at the plant in Iowa who was dismantling warheads. And I've told the guys the story where he had developed a benign brain tumor. Now, the normal practice with the Department of Labor is if you have a cancer, that's correct. You know, there's actually the other way around, 2.2 kilograms in a pound. Right. Okay. Anyway, I should say, let's see, yeah, it should be 2.2 pounds in each kilogram.
Right, 2.2 pounds per kilogram.
That's correct. So we're talking about, in one of these cylinders, somewhere, again, you've actually got, let's say, 5 kgs of the 234 in a cylinder that has hundreds of pounds of product in it. And so what I'm driving at is this man was completely turned down every which way to Sunday. And one of the professors at the medical school at the University of Iowa says, this man's getting sicker and sicker, but we can't get his claim through. So I took on the claim, and one day his wife calls me up, and his wife is one of these women who's developed angel's wings, because as his physical condition has deteriorated, she had to quit her job, and basically she's his 24/7 nurse. And so anyway, he had developed a meningioma that was the size of a golf ball. So it was impinging on, you name the body function inside his brain, that body function was failing. And anyway, one day he was having a good day, so I took notes when they called. And what I realized was when he was dismantling the warheads containing the product that we had made at Portsmouth, his exposure was to both the 234 and the 235. And when I researched it, what I found was that the 234, depending on whose literature you read, is between 3,000 and 10,000 times as radioactive as the 235. So when you're only measuring the radiation from the 234, I should say from the 235, you've missed the vast majority of the radiation exposure. Okay? So anyway, now we fast forward and we go to his hearing. And the hearing representative says, well, Mr. Bradley was exposed to 1 rem of radiation. And he says, Dr. Minuta, what do you think? And I said, sir, on the contrary, I believe he was exposed to about 500 rem of radiation. And so hearing representative says, why? And I said, because the man is still living. And he looks at me in a very puzzled way. And he says, why 500? And I told him if his exposure was much higher than that, it would have killed him. He's still here to talk about it. And the fact that the meningioma is not a cancer excluded him from the SEC, the Special Exposure Cohort. But you don't get meningioma or prostate cancer or any of these other conditions working at Dairy Queen. And I actually have to make that statement into the record when I'm under oath. Because when you're working at a federal site, you're being exposed to things that realistically you're not going to be exposed to anyplace else. I had that exchange when I looked at the transcript at least 3 times with the hearing representative until he finally understood what I was talking about. And to make a long story short, that claim was accepted, and Mr. Bradley is finally getting the care that he needs, and his wife is now being paid for being his home health aide. And again, that's not what they got married for, but that's the situation that they're in. And now multiply this by not only our site and not only the Iowa plant, but this is going on throughout the country, where anyone who's dealt with highly enriched uranium and has radiation-induced illnesses, I can almost guarantee you that it's from the exposure to the 234. And just to also link up with some of our other discussion, all of the uranium has 92 protons. That's what makes uranium unique from everything else. The 238, which is the primary natural isotope, has 146 neutrons. So the 235 is 143, and the 234 has 142. Well, in a news flash to DOE leadership, where the hell did the other neutrons go? You can't have neutrons disappear on you. And the area where Jeff was injured is loaded with neutrons because of the isotope distribution, because you've got to have mass balance. We go back to the fundamental engineering principle of mass balance, that your neutrons are not disappearing. And then I was talking to one of the men who I've done work for in the past, and he made a very important point to me, which is that even if you had the workers wearing neutron dosimeters, you actually have to have the dosimeters calibrated in the right range, because you can have a range of possibly 7 to 10 orders of magnitude. In other words, if 7 orders of magnitude gets you to 1 million, 10 orders of magnitude gets you to 1 billion. And so if you're in the wrong range, you're not going to pick anything up. The catch here is the slower the neutrons are, the more likely they are to cause fission in the 235 isotope, which is actually the principle behind how we're able to derive energy in a nuclear reactor. And so, I mean, there's more complication than that. But if a slow neutron is impacting on a person with 235 in their system, the same fission reaction that takes place in a power reactor is taking place in their body cells. Yeah. And it's got to be from the neutrons that have been slowed down, whether by water or by any of your other body tissues.
Dr. Minuta, are we being cooked, literally?
Yes, we are. And again, this shouldn't be news to the Department of Energy. Now, it is news to the Department of Labor, because they haven't grown up with this technology like all of us have. Okay? The Department of Energy should be ashamed of itself for not conferring with its senior level leadership, who certainly know this. And when you talk to people at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I'm certain that the senior leadership at the NRC is aware of this. But the people who are sitting in judgment with the Department of Labor don't know this. And when I have conversations, whether it's at the Cleveland District Office or whether it's national office in Washington, I might as well be talking Chinese to them. And eventually what's going to happen, and Jeff has been this route before, and Chip is a great advocate, is much of the work that I do today is as a court-recognized expert in the courts. And what I recognize now is that I can testify to what I just told you in court, and it'll get the attention of the judge and the jury. The people that the Department of Labor brings in will not have standing. And so I'm thinking when we put a lot of these puzzle pieces together, the Department of Labor is in a world of trouble because now they're going to have to pay on a lot of the claims that they've denied. Now, I also want to pull back a little bit because I heard some discussion when I excused myself. Paul's been through the meat grinder on the dose reconstruction.
How many times, Paul?
5.
5, and each time it's gotten lower. Now, they'd mentioned Stu Heinefeld, and I meet with Stu every so often. And I want to be charitable to him. He's nearing retirement, and he probably doesn't want to get involved in something hugely complicated like this. But at the end of the day, he has a professional duty to acknowledge what he's dealing with. Because when you do a dose reconstruction, the NIOSH, the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, are going to be evaluating 33 cancers. There's only 4 cancers in that group of 33 that hit a probability of causation greater than 50%. Lung cancer is one of them. And by the way, the man who worked as a roofer, the prostate cancer went along with the lung cancer for the ride.
Metastasized.
Yes.
I understand.
And so the thing is, because when I looked at the records at the gentleman's attorney's office, what I realized is that claim wasn't accepted for prostate cancer as a standalone. It was accepted as prostate plus lung. Now, lung cancer, according to the Department of Labor and NIOSH, has the highest probability of causation. And then I think there's 2 leukemias and a skin cancer.
Dr. Menuda,
Yes.
This is Jeff Walburn. If on a statistical model and a random sample of the amount of guards that served as SRT, TRT, anti-terrorism that had the most exposure to neutrons, the number of exposure and the number of men under an age that you wouldn't expect them to get the prostate cancer it's off the chart statistically. Any reasonable thinking person would say this can't happen here.
Let me fill in the rest of the blanks on that one. Prostate cancer is one of the 29 that doesn't score over 50%. So virtually every guard who's filed for prostate cancer has been denied after multiple times through. Now, the one where I became most acutely aware of this was a man whose PSA went up more in 3 months than a man's would go up in 5 years. So in other words, we're dealing with a much more aggressive form of prostate cancer than the prostate cancer that emerges as men age. So just like there may be 33 types of cancers that they evaluate, within those 33, there may be 200 total cancers. because of the different types that fall in the same family. So the fact is, we're dealing with a horse of an entirely different color. But now beyond that, when I've started to read in detail the denial letters on the dose reconstructions, and I want you to understand this, that as a professional scientist, this is something where if I tried it once, I would be caught and I would never, ever be allowed to work again. Is they use what's called a Monte Carlo random number generator. So when you read the dose reconstruction denial reports, it's exactly what you think it is. It's how they generate the odds at gambling establishments. What the hell this has to do with radiation exposure is a mystery to me. Now, I speak as a retired naval officer. And what I want to tell you is I could have lost my commission if I had released information on troop movements or positions of ships at sea. Working at the atomic plant, if I spoke to an audience that was not allowed to hear classified information, I'd be out on the street tomorrow.
And in prison.
And in prison. I'd like to, and I've asked Stu Heinefeld this question directly. What is it about the computer codes that you use that requires the same degree of protection that were required in my military service, and then after that, when I worked in the nuclear industry? I'm still waiting for an answer. Because he knows if he's not going to voluntarily cough it up, a judge will force him to cough it up. And at that point, he's in deep doo-doo. Okay, that last point I wanted to raise about the dose reconstruction is that since the beginning of the program, Mr. Heinefeld has indicated that they've done something like 40,000 total dose reconstructions.
Gosh.
They estimate about 28% have been accepted. Okay? So that means that 72% are being denied. So I asked him this question. Can you tell me which situation we're dealing with? A ball player hitting 280 or your son getting 28% on his math homework? Meaning the ball player hitting 280 gets to play, but if your son is only getting 28% of his math problems right, you want him to stay after school with the teacher to get properly remediated.
Mm-hmm.
I've never gotten an answer from him on that, because to answer any of those questions would mean to expose the dose reconstruction, and I'll say it as loud as you want me to say it, for the fraud that it is. And Paul is a living example of what a joke it is. Okay? If Paul had worked the same period of time over at Dairy Queen now, he'd be playing with his grandkids now. He wouldn't be involved in this fight with the rest of us. And the bottom line is that, unfortunately, it probably will take, where the prostate cancer claims, and there's plenty of them here, just as Jeff has mentioned, there's a cluster here. I don't know how you can deny the existence of a prostate cancer cluster amongst the Portsmouth security guards. The intention at some time in the near future is to get that certified as a class action lawsuit. At that point, the Department of Labor has to respond to it. Okay, at that, they can't blow people off anymore because the judge has a little bit more clout than I have. But I've told the leadership in Washington, the easy way is to deal with me when I'm in Washington. The hard way is to have a judge do it on his schedule.
Dr. Menudo,
Yes.
one of the things that we find, and I've been to court 6 times, is that people see DOE as a regulator here. And we have documents to prove and show that we've contacted Congressman Strickland. We've contacted Congressman Schmidt. We've contacted Senator Brown. Senator Brown says, and funny, that Mr. Lawson and I aren't the ignorant Appalachian hillbillies that they refer to us as, and that they have a dossier on me and Mr. Lawson. I would like to see that dossier, and I would like to know why Senator Brown can take his fingers and make a large amount of paperwork, almost a ream of paper on us, and we can't see that dossier. Even if we file a FOIA, we're not going to get the dossier. But the IG of DOE, former Gregory Friedman, he had motive. He had motive to cover this up.
Then he may go to prison with us.
He had motive. He was an acting IG. The privatization was coming. There was $2 billion exchanging hands between DOE and USEC, and they were trading uranium on the open market. He got his appointment just about 1 month before this all happened. If you look at the Ralph Nader lawsuit, the NRC went into the SEC and the Security and Exchange Commission and testified that they didn't know about any problems. But you look at Mr. Lawson's previous documents that we have that says that he and Charlie Cox and Lee Fink discussed it at length, and that they knew there were all kinds of safety problems at the plant. But so we go to the Justice Department. Now let's talk about John Kohler, also known as Jack Kohler. I filed a quitum. I said, there's a problem here. There has to be a problem here. It's the government should get this money back. Why aren't they tracking to get the money back? So they assign John Kohler to the suit, and guess who becomes the investigator for John Kohler? DOE. And I said, well, now how does that happen? So they assign a person named Patricia Warren. She investigates for 2 years under seal, can't find anything, comes to Charles Lawson's house. Jack Kohler doesn't even identify himself. She threatens, shows a weapon, threatens to take Lawson's documents with her. And I mean, there's an exchange there that you'd only have to hear it to believe that it was mighty intense. Kohler jumping up saying, wait a minute, we don't want no trouble here. So, but Chick is telling them of criminal acts. He's in the civil division. He's not telling the criminal division, hey, we've got a criminal act here. How many times do we have to say we have a criminal act going on? Mm-hmm. So I keep after Kohler. We have a meeting. One of the interesting things in the meeting is that Kohler discovered that they weren't putting people in the hospital, and that they had filed Lockheed had filed a OSHA recordable on themselves. Then when we went to the workers' comp hearing and they put falsified documents in my workers' comp, then they pulled the OSHA recordable on themselves because under the SEC, if you look at the prospectus on a person that's going to let stock, if they have sickness, illness, cancers, exposures, you've got OSHA recordables. Who would buy a piece of stock like that? So the NRC knows, DOE knows. They have dual joint oversight. Ralph Nader's going into SEC lawsuits. The court is saying, well, Mr. Nader, here's the oversight people. They say there's not a problem here. We're going to let this go. So they let the stock. People are making millions of dollars. Congressmen, senators are making money. Everybody's making money.
And you know what the stock is worth today? about 1/10 of a cent per share.
About 1/10 of a percent per share. But now, if you look at the Geoperspectives report, there's an internal report by Mary Bird Davis. She even talks about my incident in there, even though she didn't know what it was. But she talks about how they, Dr. Menuda had talked about, like rolling dice. They rolled the dice on their workers, and they killed more workers at Portsmouth than they ever killed in the Cold War. And I can tell you, if you want to see some of the people that's asked me to come and film them at their house, some hideous things. You talk about human experimentation. This isn't about human experimentation. This is a guy working a job right while Khrushchev was hitting his shoe on the UN floor saying he'd bury us, and he has a child with some terrible, terrible
Born
problem.
without a face.
She was born without a face. And so I said, what did they do for you? I had stayed all night with this man. Dr. Menuda's talking about growing up in the gaseous diffusion. I was one of the kids that hid under the desk from the nuclear attack. We had drills. Not only did we have fire drills, we had civil defense.
Do you remember the old air raid drills?
Yeah, all the old air raid drills. So, but Hazel O'Leary, and I won't get into this deeply, but Hazel O'Leary under the Bill Richardson and Bill Clinton, she broke the news that they had done human experimentation. So when we go to a lot of these meetings and people go, "Why, Doe wouldn't do that to you?" I said, "Well, read her human experimentation articles and see what they would do." So, but we go to the Justice Department. I set up the day my granddaughter was born. Charles Lawson and Paul Brogdon took criminal evidence to John Kohler at Louisville, and it was March 6, 2013. They showed him where the external lawyers had lied to a federal judge. He stood up. He said, "Why, we can't do this. I'm the person that wrote did this investigation." So he says, "I wrote a memo." And he has also spoken to me over the phone that he wrote a memo for the government not to join this suit. And I said, "I'll have that memo." And he says, "No, you can't get that memo." And I said, "Wait a minute. Maybe a senator or congressman can get the memo you wrote to the DOJ saying don't join this suit when there's red flags everywhere. Yeah, people screaming criminal. Doe can't find anything, and calmly old John Kohler says, "Do you think I ought to call the criminal division?" No, I'm not calling them. That'd be the last person I'd call." And then he tells me, "Well, Jeff, you just didn't convince me." I said, "Is it you? Are you the bar? Are you the bar that I have to convince? Or do we get, at some point, you'll have Lockheed say," and they'll see this, read it every time. I love it when Mr. Wilburn's been to court and he's never won a suit yet. The suit has never been heard on its merit in front of a jury. And if you look at my 2000 Senate hearing, I called for a third-party criminal investigation of Doe and their subcontractors then. Here we are 16 years down the road. Doe mishandled the first round of the EEOI-CPA. It was taken away from him. They took the horses, but Doe still controls the reins, and they are the ultimate overseer. Every time Paul Brogdon went, his person said, "We've got to see what Doe tells us. It doesn't matter what you've brought in here. It doesn't matter what your records say.
It's the records, whether they exist or not."
And so we have a point of contention between us and Doe and the Department of Labor, and we have elected officials. Rand Paul, he shared the information that I gave him showing that the IG was lying to him with Ed Whitfield. Now, finally here, Ed Whitfield's kind of got off his duff, and he's wanting a hearing too. And I said, "Well, good. He's known about it since 2011 or before."
Now, Ed Whitfield is the congressman from the Paducah area. That's a sister plant to ours.
But there are 700 workers currently from Kentucky working at a federal facility in Ohio. They like to play a game, well, it belongs to Portman. We can't say nothing. It belongs to Portman. I said, wait a minute. 700 workers from Kentucky working at a federal facility. That facility is not Ohio. It is federal.
Federal property.
That's correct. DOE owns the real estate. The 3,700 odd
But
acres.
I'm sitting here telling you, and it is my opinion, based on the interaction that I had with my lawyer, John Kohler, and Patricia Warren, and I want to make a point here that when we got the hidden logs, we gave that to the IG, but it went through Robert Brown, the operating head of DOE at Oak Ridge. So he goes to Pete Johnson, and they go to all these people. So Randy DeVault sees the hidden log, and he said, "What's this?" And I said, "Have you ever seen this?" And he said, "No, I have not." And I said, "You've never seen that report?" He said, "No, I have not." And I said, "You are the chief investigator in a DOE injury accident of multiple people over that's still going on to this day, that the CDC has covered up this document, and you've never seen it?" He said, "And I won't testify until I'm brought in front of a jury and put under oath." Why has no one been put under oath so far? They've only been interviewed. These people need to be put under oath and penalty of perjury.
But that's the reason why you've got to have either a federal suit or a class action suit certified so you can depose them. Because under deposition, some of them would fold rather than be under
Like a
oath.
cheap suit.
And which is because once I think it becomes clear that a deposition is coming. Now, I get deposed all the time in my criminal cases. So I'm not afraid of the other lawyers because I'm loaded for bear when I go in.
Well, Dr. Menuda, here's what you've got to know. Linda Smith and Chris Kelly sitting in deposition under oath testified that they changed thousands of badges. Not only that, that they committed a crime in changing mine because I was going to file a lawsuit. And Robert Tate of Boyer, Sater, Seymour, and Peace sat for the company, and those people were either lying under oath and are guilty of a penalty of perjury, or they're telling the truth. Which is it?
And now, by the way, for our listeners, that's probably the largest government relations law firm in the city of Columbus. They represent all the big shots. And some of them...
They have a bad history.
I was thinking about what's the best way to put it, and I think Chick has the right language. There is a bad history with their involvement because I've dealt with them on various levels, and it's not always... Are you all right? And it's not always a pleasant experience. So, more or less, when their counsel at that time to Lockheed Martin, you know which side of the bread it's buttered on for them. And so, because of the side that they sit on, they had to make an ethical decision, and they made the wrong ethical decision.
Just like you say, though, these law pages and judges, who do they ultimately go to? They go to Doe and say, well, tell us what's right. Tell us what's right.
Well, that's why I think if I get designated as, say, the master on this one, and they come to me, I may be able to pick out the mistakes or the errors that Doe is making. Because quite often, on an unrelated issue, when insurance matters come up, oftentimes an insurance company will say to me, here's the scenario, do we pay or do we contest it? And in other words, when a lot of us were working, we didn't get listened to. But I'm now in a position where I do get listened to. And so if I were the court-appointed master on this, I could begin to pick out which DOE people are lying.
Would insurance fraud be a problem here? Because there's people having to go that they know and knowingly are injured, and they have the documentation and not coming forward and saying so. So then the insurance company is being tasked with the bill when they are not they're not liable.
Well, my favorite one is with someone who has an occupational illness, which should be paid for by the EEOICPA. Best example would be people say denied oxygen for breathing issues. Is they'll end up getting it paid for by the VA or by Medicare because they can't waste time dealing with whether it's DOE or DOL. Because if your very existence depends on oxygen or it depends on some type of durable medical equipment, you can't wait for these jokers, because ultimately what they're trying to do, they figure if they lie enough, they run out the clock on people.
Yeah, we'll die.
Well, I hate to say it, but it sounds like euthanasia.
It is, and the thing is, I'm hoping that 2016 is not only the year where all of this is exposed, but it's where we see the beginning of positive action.
Yes,
because
and ultimately, wrapping things up, our goal here with Call to Actions and collaborating with, pretty much the masterminds on this critical subject is to get this case reopened and finally bring justice. And I do believe that 2016 is the year for this.
We surely hope so.
You all have anything else you would like to say before we wrap things up? Kimberly wanted to say something as well.
I'd just like to say that I think there's been a news blackout on this across the country, and if a person like Jon Stewart's he's on ground zero. He's a comedian that suddenly decided that things aren't so funny anymore. And I see his point. If a person like Jon Stewart would stand up for ground zero against a guy like Larry Elliott that's been promoted out of our system because he's done such a good job against us, then maybe Jon Stewart needs to talk about this to us. But moreover, the news needs to start talking about it because it's a persona non grata. We don't want to talk about it. It's a bad point in our history. It's ugly. Why? The government has a lot of money to pay these people or lean on them for not reporting.
Yeah.
The other point I would like to make is that when I went to work out there, being somewhat patriotic because of my past experiences, I went to work to do the right thing, to be a good worker, to give 110% all the time. I didn't go to work so I could get sick and die. I've got wife and kids. But it does bring out another story and what we call the Bailey incident. Now keep in mind, the DOE, Department of Energy people, we're having to fight for every illness. I've got 5 illnesses based on my work. The Department of Defense, the SST drivers and haulers of the material that we made,
Only around it for 36 hours at a time.
they gave them medical cards and also covered the children that were born to them while they worked there.
One of which had neuroblastoma. This report, because I'm very familiar with it, is called the Gordon S. Moe report. It was done under Bill Richardson. There was if you look at the report, it's also known as the Southern Cross incident or Bailey incident because the person was named Bailey. There was a mutiny of the SST drivers. So they said, well, they profiled these drivers. You're a hippie, you're a patriot, you're a ignorant Appalachian hillbilly, you know, whatever. They pigeonhole and they do these ad hominem attacks throughout. They've done them on us. They did them on Chris Kelly, the girl that come forward. If you ever watch Silkwood, you'll know what happened to Chris Kelly. Yeah. They said everything in the book against her, said she wanted to kill herself. We believe they wanted to kill her. She had a bastard child.
A lesbian with a bastard child.
A lesbian with a bastard child. And at that time, and the way the world was in the DOE system, if it was even alluded to that you might be not other than heterosexual, your clearance was in jeopardy. And so they held this girl 8 hours against her will, shoved recant pages in front of her, and she stood up. They sent the Ohio Drug Task Force to her house and kicked her door in. And they've done it on 2 other people, and we've got the documentation saying you got dope here. She's going, I work at the plant. I've got a kid. They drug test me. I don't do that here. They said, you better watch who you talk to. You better watch who you talk to. So we let former Senator DeWine and the governor know this in Ohio. Nothing. They haven't done jack shit.
Mr. Kasich, Governor Kasich, who's running for president.
Now, so Mr. Kasich running for president, Rand Paul running for president, all these people running for president. How about doing the job you were elected for before you go try to get another job, because you've done such a good job so far? But the point being, and what digressing, this report, Secretary Richardson gave the store away. If you looked at it as what we're looking at now, we're going, hell, give us that. Mr. Bailey's child had neuroblastoma. I can prove 2 or 3 guards that I've got that we work with, kids died of neuroblastoma. We made the stuff. We're around it 24/7. They were around it 36 hours. They get the benefits because he was afraid of a mutiny.
My point in this is, my youngest son, who is now 24 years old, was born with a mass in the center of his brain, inoperable. Luckily, it's been benign, and that it hasn't grown any. But every 6 months, he has to go get checked with an MRI to see if it's starting to grow. My 28-year-old daughter has a tumor into her nervous system. It is benign, but I can't get them any benefits. I can't hardly get the benefits for me, which when I was injured out there, got beryllium in my system, in my lungs, not getting paid for it. I've got COPD, emphysema, asthma, and chronic bronchitis. And who knows what else it's going to cause me to have. I didn't go to work to get sick and die. I went to work to do a good job, to have money to raise my family in a decent environment. But it's been anything but that.
21 years for Mr. Lawson and I on this investigation. March, let's see, it would be 16 years since the 2000 Senate hearing. 21 years since we started this. To give you a brief history, we've got records clear back into Goodyear, where we have a man named John Bransford that wrote a mea culpa letter saying that he was ordered to destroy records and tapes. He lied to the Kennedy Commission. They did not want the IH married to the HP to show why workers were getting sick. That was in 79. Go back to 57.
Mancuso.
The Mancuso letter from President Romaine of the OCAW. Many are sick. We need an investigation. This is not new. You go, so we've got decades, generations, regimes, and then you go out to Michelle Dobrovony or Dobonnet at Rocky Flats, who stands up in the middle of one of these NIOSH meetings and says, I destroyed all their records. They ordered me to. I work for Doe. I destroyed all their records. So we've connected the dots. How many times do we have to do it here?
Now, I just want to make one closing comment, because I know Kimberly wanted to speak. I did a lot of investigative work when I was chief scientist at the plant, and one of the things that was universal was when I'd be out and about in the plant and the guards were standing sentry duty, I'd send my guys out dressed like they were astronauts. The guards would be dressed in uniform. And quite often afterwards I'd ask, were you briefed on any of this? And the answer was almost universally no. And the thing is, and it continues to this day. So we're looking at probably 3 generations now of this type of behavior. When the guards, like I said before, they're protecting the crown jewels. And the crown jewels are not protecting your food ingredients at Dairy Queen. And so it's not only a local issue or a state issue, but it's also a national security issue based on the nature of what we're dealing with. And at some point, somebody has to listen and then be at a high enough position to where they actually can do something.
Oh, we're going to stay on this. We're going to continue this conversation. This is not the last time. This is not just one interview. This is laying the foundation, and then we're going to stay at this because we are not going to give up on it. We are going to get that lawsuit, that class action lawsuit. That's why we're here today to discuss this. And I just wanted to make mention, not only does this affect this generation, it's 4 to 5 generations at the chromosome level that are affected.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're not talking just, you and your children. It's your children's children and their children's children. So
exactly.
This is much bigger than, just what we're looking at right here. This is a crime against humanity, and the cover-up is disgusting, and we are not going to stop until this class action lawsuit is in order and this is brought to justice.
Yes.
And John Cardarelli made the statement one time. John Cardarelli broke with Cincinnati NIOSH because he couldn't do the politics. He said, I figured this. He made a statement to us. He said they could have paid every one of these people and given benefits and still not spent as much money nationally as they have. And I said, it's not about that. He said, no, it's about the cash cow. That's the way he described it, the cash cow. So when Thomas Galassi, the director of Directorate of Enforcement, says, I'm sending this to the IG of NIOSH and DOL, and then we go through Marcus Eder and say, Mr. Eder, there's a letter saying to turn this to the IG. Mr. Eder says, there's no such letter. Mr. Galassi didn't give that to the IG. And he said, we're turning it over to the RICO squad. And so then when Mr. Lawson and I say that we want to proctor the documents, that we won't allow them to do co-intelligence on us and just take in the information and just put it in a black hole, they say, well, you don't know nothing. You don't even have a claim, Mr. Warburton. I said, I don't have to have a claim to know that you are committing fraud as we speak. And I said, I am accusing you of that. I said, and you must be one great investigator, Mr. Vandenberg. You've never even seen the documents, and you already know the outcome.
And that's why I think if I get involved in this with my history, is they're less likely to pull stunts like that.
We want you here.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, because I don't want to brag on myself, but this fall be 10 years since we last had an unfavorable outcome in any case outside of this program that I've been a part of. And so I don't know how long the streak is, and I really don't care how long the streak is, because when you do what's right, that's what's the most important thing.
Can I make another quick statement?
Yeah.
Dr. Nuda talked about not being able to find records, that people have to prove this. You have multiple little companies out there working at the D&D now of that plant. One of those companies is called WIMS. There's a man there that's by the name of Rick Carell. Mr. Carell, one of his jobs, and I found this out by asking someone to go ask a question. And let's say Joe Blow says, I was in a release in the X326 building in December of '84, and this is how they treated me at the plant hospital. They call it a hospital, even though it was basically a first aid station. So the Department of Labor then calls for your records from the storage facility in Dayton, Ohio. They are sent to Mr. Carell. Mr. Carell has to go through and make sure there's nothing classified in that record. So he's saying, oh, X326, that's classified billing. Well, they can't see that. He pulls that out. Now that, my opinion, is what is happening, because now he goes to the hearing officer and they say, well, you said in '84 you was in this release. It's not in your medical records. Why is that? Well, I don't know. It was there when I left the plant site. They're sanitizing their medical records, going to the Department of Labor, to the hearing officers. People are being denied their benefits off of sanitized records. You can't get the 50% causation because the archive tapes were destroyed. You can't get 50% causation because the hard copy records were destroyed. Tim Tolby says, oh, glory be to God, we found some old records and now we know what their dose records were. Well, I won't say, because of my religious beliefs, what I think that is. But I think it's, in my opinion, a great big fat lie, because they would have showed those records to prove that I was wrong.
Can you say horse shit?
Yeah, that's not a swear word.
No, horse shit.
Horse or
not.
shit,
They do.
That's right.
They do. Yeah.
Okay, well, we want to thank you all for being together and staying in action. I can, all the way across the country, feel the power that you all have together. And it's a pleasure and honor to be able to bring you all onto our little show and ultimately bring justice together, because this definitely is a collaborative project and the collaboration is not going away. And again, we want to thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Bobby and Kim. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks a bunch.
Yes, you guys. God bless you, and we will have this to you momentarily.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is a call to actions. Over and out.